up in a branch on a tree. There's an Australian Army boot, and that's okay. But within that there's still an Australian Army leg, and then that sort of image would sort of haunt some of these guys, forever. Could even be that there's another doc with me and med assistants. I think he saw about 700 in a day. It is just a stampede. The whole thing's a lot dirtier and messier than all the first aid. You can see all the first aid programs in the world, but when you see actually wounded soldiers in pain, dead soldiers, it is terrible.
Can you kind of walk us through that day?
Well, that was undoubtedly the most terrible day of my life, really.
So Tony, I just you can focus on you
Sure,
too. Just give us a little introduction to your life so far.
Well, my name's Tony White. I was born in 1940 in Perth, WA, and we lived there a very short time. My father's a lawyer down in Albany, and that was shortly after the outbreak of the war, and he very soon after joined the AIF himself, and so we all shipped back here to Sydney where we originated, and well, my dad was away, and then at the end of the war we all shipped off to Kenya, where my grandfather had settled after World War I, and I had an uncle living, and we went there originally just for a holiday, but actually ended up staying there my entire childhood. I did all my schooling there. Britain was then the colonial power, so all tertiary education was then on to England. So I went and did my first years of medicine at Cambridge, and then I had to decide whether to become a POM or to become an Aussie again, and I made the right decision and came back to Sydney and finished off my medical course here. Unfortunately, at that time, the family had, my parents' marriage had broken up, and so we were out of money, and I was faced with the choice of either abandoning my medical studies, or option two was to sell myself to the armed forces, and which I did, and I entered a bond with the Army. They paid for my second 3 years of medical training in exchange for 4 years of service with the Army. So at the end of my intern year, I was into the Army, and I was very quickly, it was very steep learning curve. I was into the battalion very shortly, and away to Vietnam within a few months of completing my intern year, really knowing very little medicine and even less about the Army. So I had then actually ended up having 5 years in the Army, had a year in Vietnam, and then after that 18 months at the recruit training battalion at Kapuka as the MO there, and then we were posted to Singapore, to the British Military Hospital there, and then that completed my 5 years with the Army. I then, back in civilian life, I went to Prince Alfred Hospital to train as a physician, and then I decided on dermatology, and so I became a dermatologist. I then had a couple of years in the States of postgraduate stuff, and since then I've been in private practice in Sydney, and I've continued my link with the Army. I was the consultant dermatologist for the Army until the retiring age, which was then 55, and but I'm chugging along in private practice at the age of 64, and I've got plenty of outside interests and activities, and I do certainly keep up my links with my old colleagues, and we are actually planning our first trip back to Vietnam next year.
Can you talk to us a little bit about, I guess, the dawning of that idea of, signing up to the Army to finish your medical career?
Well, I had to do some fast thinking. So I was arrived back in Australia in December of '61. The academic year started then in about March, I think, the following year. I had been accepted into the fourth year of medical school, but no dough. So what do you do? And this is a Christmas break. Nothing much happens in the world in Australia at that time. And I had to scout around for the options, and the only option was the armed services. I tried the Navy. That sounded sort of more glamorous, but they nothing doing. They had no jobs, and so the next stop was the Army, and they were very happy. So I too was happy.
And the Air Force wasn't a consideration?
Not really. No, I thought the Army sounded better. Yeah.
What was it about the Army?
I don't know. It's just I think it's probably just item 2 on the list. I don't remember the Navy was first for sure, but I know why I got the Army rather than the Air Force. Air Force would be more comfortable for sure in retrospect. But no, the Army was fine. They grabbed me with both hands and signed up very quickly, and away we went.
What was? Can you detail the kind of terms that you signed in?
So you signed up on. They would pay for your salary as an undergraduate. You had a book allowance that paid your university fees. That was before free university, which is a huge plus. And then they would nab you then the year after your junior resident year, which is now called intern year. So 3 years as an undergraduate, 1 year then as your hospital-based training, and then into the Army. And the deal was 4 years. And then away you went, sort of as a bond for 4 years. In fact, I did 5.
Right. So how much of a break did you have from, graduating as an intern to getting scooped up? So straight after the intern year, they had a bunch of new doctors from all states had to go to the School of Army Health at Healesville in Victoria. And it was a 6-week, what they call it, indoctrination course. And this was to teach you how to be an Army doctor, you see, and all that basic stuff about, uniform, parade ground, the rank structure, Army health, and so on. And that which is just what you need, after all, that transition from civilian life into the Army. But I got snatched 6 days into that to join the battalion. So I really didn't have any of that. So it was a 6-week course, I had 6 days. So I really rolled up in the battalion then, which was being assembled in a huge hurry to go to Vietnam in the May. So I think in about January or February I had this non-existent course, then straight into and we were away in May. So the battalion had only been formed in March of the previous year. So it itself was a pretty new entity. And then I was dropped into this, and there's a feverish activity, getting everything ready, and I was just, chucked in the deep end. What did you know of Vietnam or?
Nothing. No. So, and I think Australians didn't know anything about it. We really had some training team people there. We'd had a battalion there for a year, but it was a very hazy area. Nowadays, of course, it's very well known. But then people had a hazy idea about the French in China getting booted out, and then the Second War was getting underway, and we were going to go up there and stop the communists there. And there's the idea of the domino theory, but no, I really knew nothing at all. I had to really get an atlas out to find out where it was, and I didn't really know anything at all about it.
And what about, your first taste of Army discipline and the regiment of service life? Well,
doctors in a special category. You see, they're given a lot of license. You can put your uniform on back to front and so on, and they'll laugh at it. And I think this is the way doctors are. You see, and so you still have to work within the system, and you are an officer after all. You've got a commanding officer, you've got superior officers who you report to, and then you've got a sort of hierarchy below you, but it is quite a privileged position. It's really like being the battalion padre. You're within it, but you're outside it, and I found the officers in the battalion when I joined very helpful, because they knew that I was going to need a lot of help, and they did actually pitch in, and they'd give me little sort of one-to-one tutorials on army life, and the very basic stuff that you're in this totally alien culture. Do you salute a corporal, or does he salute you, and all that sort of stuff, and how you should deal with say other colleagues who might be difficult or obstructive, how to get things done, and how to work the system, in other words.
What sort of advice did you get on that front?
To get rid of one very obstructive sergeant I had in my medical sergeant. He was very tricky and really obstructing the whole preparation. So it was a real frenzy of activity, as you can imagine. Getting gear, it sounds simple. You just got to get your medical gear together, and but it's actually you're taking gear for 3 months for 850 troops out there, and you can't depend on resupply during that time. So there was a lot of hitches along that line, and I had a very unhelpful chap. So he got the boot very early on, and I had then after that it was pretty all plain sailing. Well, not plain sailing, but it was doable. And but just getting to know. See, I think a battalion is it's like a giant family, and this is the guts of esprit de corps, that you get to know people, and a lot of people get to know in a short time.
Can you, can you sort of step us through in detail about, going to the battalion and just that whole reacquaintance with a new life, in a sense? And what
it was roll up to. I met the adjutant. He's a sort of like the chief administrative officer. He was a Brit, actually, a fellow called Peter Isaacs, and he sort of introduced me around, and the next step was we just went straight off on a big exercise up in a training area called Gospers, which is between Lithgow and Singleton, and very rough country. And I, of course, only had about a quarter of my gear, so I was cold and wet and unsheltered. I didn't have all the right gear, and so here again, there's a lot of sort of shuffling and so on to get bodgy gear together. So we were just camping out on the ground, and I was issued with a batman, and a batman is an officer's servant, and he in turn was the Nasho, so he didn't know much about the army, but we gradually, over that period of the pre-Vietnam thing, we got a working system going, and but it was a shambles, yeah, for sure, big rush.
What was the exercise that you went up to do in Gospers, and what was your role?
Well, just the doctor. So the doctor, you're there, and so somebody gets injured. On day one, I had a guy dislocated his kneecap and so on, and then people come to you with, they've got a bronchitis, or you're just the GP for 800 blokes strung out in the bush, and they're organised in their companies of 100, and so you may have one bunch, kilometre over there, and another bunch over that way, and in each one you'd have your own medical corporal, a medical corps corporal, and he would be the sort of first port of call, and then he'd contact you if he had something, something a bit more serious. So it could be a scorpion bite, or somebody's fallen over and hurt themselves. And
so were you sort of setting up like an RAP in the field, or was it?
In the field, your RAP is just what you carry on your back.
Yeah.
So it's just so you have a basic medical kit.
What would it contain?
It contain painkillers, some basic antibiotics, field dressings, heavy-duty sort of shears for cutting uniform off if somebody had a wound. I had a lovely silver tracheotomy set, which fortunately I never had to use. This is for drilling a hole in the trachea and somebody who had their face blown away. And that was about it. In Vietnam, I carried a little bit more extensive stuff, but that's really all you need. You just need your brain and some dressings, some painkillers, some antibiotics.
In your workup, were you issued with a weapon?
Yeah, all officers carried a 9mm pistol, but I never used it in anger. Used to test fire it into a weapons pit before going out on operations, but out on the beach in Vietnam, shoot up a few beer cans. But that's the only time I ever fired it.
When you joined the battalion, were you given all the medical records of the soldiers to look at?
So the soldiers they had a folder. I don't know what the system's nowadays. They had a folder with their medical record, and that travelled with the soldier in the RAP, in the medical centre, which is what an RAP is. So the staff sergeant who ran the RAP looked after the records. So if you were, say, out in the bush, you wouldn't have that, but back in the base, you'd have access to it. So if you're out in the bush, you just jot a note in your notebook and then transcribe it later.
So you didn't. I mean, I know there's a lot of men, obviously,
Yeah.
but I mean, did you need to look at any specific files or anything, or was it just as you got to know the people?
That's because you're dealing with a fit group. They're all screened and they're all supposed to be fit for service overseas, which is the top level. They had a grading system, where if you're an old wreck, you'd be sitting in a base somewhere and behind a desk. At the other end of the spectrum, you'd be fit for service overseas, and that's at top. So you assume that they hadn't any medical problems in effect.
Just in that workup to going to Vietnam, and even in Vietnam, I mean, did you have any soldiers? You talked a bit before about feigning illness, like
Yes.
doc, get me out of here, kind of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
did you have any of that sort of?
Now I got to tell you that it's the other way around. I had one bloke in tears because he had a knee problem, which was going to downgrade him, and he wouldn't go. So back then, people were falling over each other to get into a unit that was going to go away. So, and even a lot of the national servicemen were very keen to go. Their other option is to be sitting out at some, an Ogre or something like that, and for the duration of their national service. Whereas here, young men, adventure, travel, pay was better, tax-free. So there was. I can't recall anybody who tried to swing his way out of the battalion. If anything, it's the other way around for sure. And certainly when I was subsequently posted to Kapuka, I had again troops who were very disappointed that they were not fit enough to get into a battalion. In other words, they would be condemned to life in a base.
So how many medical staff are there within a battalion?
So do you have in the RAP itself was the regional aid post. It's the medical centre. As the doctor, you have a staff sergeant and a corporal. So that's a threesome. And then out in the battalion as a whole, each company, which is 100 troops, would have a corporal medical assistant, his medical corps, and then we had at that time the band, the army band, were also basic medics. So they were scattered around, one per platoon. So they were sort of the first port of call, and they had really very elementary sort of first aid type of training. But they were, the local medic for sure, his proximity. And then if they had a problem, they'd take him up to the corporal in the company, and if he had a problem, then he'd bring him into the RAP. But I always tried hard to get around to the companies as much as possible, just to get to know people. And often you could sort out a lot of things in discussion then with your corporal medic and the stretcher bearers. And I got them in also as much as possible for very hard to get them all together because, they're on duty. But we used to have little powwows as much as possible.
Well, what instruments would you have in your medical bag?
So I had my tracheotomy set, which is, as I mentioned, I'm very pleased not to have to use, which is a set for cutting down to put an airway into a trachea. And then, apart from that, some artery forceps, which you can use to clamp off an artery. And but just basic dressings, but not, and forceps for extracting splinters and scalpel. And that's about it, really. Nothing very extravagant. So you couldn't really carry everything you had was you carrying on your back, and that included your hoochie and your sleeping gear and your food and your medical kit. So there's a limit to what you could really take.
So how did you travel to Vietnam, and who did you go with?
I went with just with a bunch of digs from one of the companies on it's a Boeing 707 up through Townsville and Manila and into Saigon, and then from there we transshipped onto an American aircraft, big, could have been a Herc, and dropped in Vung Tau, which was the logistics base, and there we were driven out to the beach where the battalion was setting up these tents on the sand dunes, and there we stayed for about 10 days before we went into our first operation. And it was all quite a smooth operation. Nothing. It was. There's an advanced party who prepared things pretty well, so had all the dunnies set up, and we're on the beach, so we surf. And the tents are all erected, so just walk in, really, no problem.
So on the trip there, I mean, what are your first key images and I guess smells and sounds that kind of welcomed you to the country?
Well, it's first time in Asia, and heat, of course, hot smell, the smell of decay, and of course landing at the Ton Son Nhut Airport in Saigon. It was then the busiest airport in the world, they called it, because it is the main sort of fighter base and so on, and huge smell of kerosene and the noise, smell, kero, jet, and then of course in Vung Tau, hygiene is not terribly strong there, and so that's very distinctive combination of heat, humidity, and decaying vegetation. That's the first recollection. But see, having lived in Africa, I was sort of softened up for this. I wasn't at all put off by this.
And what about your first glimpse of the military might, I guess? Do you have any first impressions of
well,
that?
we didn't get... Well, the airport was... Yeah, that is big, yeah. So huge. I mean, there's all these U.S. aircraft, fighter bombers, bulging with weapons and so on. That was very spectacular. But then as soon as we got into the Aussie world, we were just back in our little Aussie world, really. We had an Aussie war, really. We didn't have an awful lot to do with Americans, so it was familiar territory, well, familiar setting, people in unfamiliar setting.
Now, when you settle into your RAP, you said that someone had been there to prep it a little bit.
So it was just a tent. So on the beach was just a tent, and in fact I don't think we had any medical records at that time. So it was really just a tent, and we had a sign outside, here's the RAP. And we were only there for 10 days, while we were sort of just shaking down, ready for the first operation, which was the beginning of the Aussie adventure in Nui Dat. So we were the first ones in there.
So, talk to me about the preparations from your point of view, going on to that first operation, briefings that you got, and what you needed to know and what you took.
We knew that we were just going to be dropped up into this rubber plantation, which would end up eventually as the Nui Dat sort of base, and we would be just effectively just bivouacking in hoochies, for a number of weeks. So all you'd be taking was really what you're carrying on your back. The Americans had done a sweep through that area. And it had had quite a few casualties, but we knew that the area was basically reasonably secure by then. And we'd had one little test movement of the battalion on a fleet of 20-odd choppers or 30 choppers, so moving the whole battalion in waves to up from the beach area to drop them in. So we'd practice that. So we learned how to climb in and out of a helicopter. So it'd come and touch down for just 7 seconds, and you get your troop load of, I think, 7 or 8 digs on board in that time, and take off straight away. So we're competent with the helicopter routine. It was just like another battalion exercise, except this is the fair dinkum one. And we did have a big shindig with the U.S. Aviation company who ran the helicopters. So we had a big dinner for them in one of the hotels in Vung Tau, and we outshone them there because the officers all had their white dress, mess dress gear, bow ties and so on, and the Yanks were just in their greens. But we had our band playing, and then they thought it was a bit over the top. And we always got very drunk and experienced the terrors of a tropical hangover after that. And then a few days later, we were off. So it was brief, it was pretty uneventful, and most people were very eager to sort of get on with it. That is the thing. Nobody's really unduly apprehensive. It was really, this is what we're here for, after all. The whole thing's assembled. Let's do it.
Do you recall the name of the first operation?
Hardihood. I don't know where the names of them came. So they dreamt up there. We had Hardihood and Canberra and Sydney and Queanbeyan and Renmark and so on.
So, you said that the battalion was moved forward in waves.
Yeah.
Where does the doctor? Is there a best place for the doctor to be?
I think it's pretty well in the middle of the stream. So they had. They moved the whole battalion up over a space of about 2 hours, quite, which is not bad for 800 people, and we're just chop it up about 20k up into just into this rubber plantation, a clearing in the rubber plantation, and so when we got there, obviously things were already the troops are all around in the rubber plantation. We had our artillery already there, and they were firing away at targets. And so just my batman and myself, and we were off to war. And as always happens, there's always a sort of comedy in these things. And we had as we jumped out of the chopper, we sort of run to under the trees, and we heard what we thought was machine gun fire. And so we both hit the ground, and in fact it was the rotor of the helicopter hitting the top of the trees. So we sort of rolled around. We realised how stupid it was. We were giggling like a couple of schoolgirls. So it was a big adventure, and it was all just the start of this just another army exercise.
So when you arrived at Nui Dat, was that all about setting up the base at Nui Dat? Was it?
Yeah. So this is the insertion of the battalion into the base, into what was to be the base. But it really is just a bit of spare real estate. It is decided that is a good spot. The rubber plantation was good because it gave you shade. There's the hill there, the Nui Dat, and which one of the companies perched on. And this is going to be our area. And so we started settling down and then patrolling from that to establish our presence.
So can you just give us a bit of a picture of what? Well, I guess it wasn't really a compound, but what?
No, it was we just here. Okay, this is where the battalion headquarters is going to be. This patch here, A company's there, D company's on the hill, C and B, and then you can put your hoochie up here, and we just got on with it. And then it was those early days, we really just perched right there while the companies did their patrols all around, and it was the start of the rain season, so we got this afternoon deluge every day. A couple of inches of rain would drop, and so it is very wet, very muddy, and we dug sort of just primitive weapons pits for protection, and hoochie up and got on with it.
Now, from your point of view, I guess you need to find a clean, fairly good working environment if need be. Like how what was your water supply like, and what did you set up to be your little aid post? I mean, how
Well, there was no physical aid post. It was just me, my backpack, and a hoochie, which is just your bivouac. And so if there was say a dig was hurt or sick or something, then that would be brought to me, or I'd be called over and just set to. And if they're bad enough, then they were evacuated by helicopter. So that we were very lucky with that Vietnam War that we had control of the air and a fantastic 20-minute chopper ride to a hospital, which is better than what you'd get on a car accident out on the Pacific Highway. So, but an awful lot of things you could sort out. Just okay, here's a guy's, say sprained an ankle or something. What are you going to do about it? Is he bad enough to be shipped out, or can he just rest up for a few days? So there was no, in those early weeks, we didn't have a physical aid post as such. It was just backpack.
Did the diggers have to take anti-malaria tablets every day?
Sure. Yeah. They're on Palliagen.
Yeah.
So malaria discipline was very strict. Sorry?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the discipline for that.
No, it was that's where I think the old sergeants had served in Malaya. They knew all about malaria, and so there was a rule then: sleeves down after sundown, mosquito repellent, and then we had mosquito nets. So in your bivouac, you had a sort of a rectangular mosquito net, which you could tie up, 4 corners, and then tuck under your blow-ups. And so being bitten, avoiding getting bitten was top of the list. Then your daily Palliagen, that was supervised, by that platoon sergeant. He would actually make sure the guy dropped it in his mouth. And as a result of it, actually our malaria rates were not too bad at all. I think we had about 20 malarias in the year. And one of the things which helped in that way really was that the digs had heard of mosquito-borne encephalitis, and that put the wind under them. So that reinforced their mosquito repellent behaviour a lot.
What's that?
It's a viral infection of the brain, which can be treated. It's a Japanese bee encephalitis, which was it was around, but that reinforced it. It wasn't just malaria. They had other things to contend with. Dengue. There's a dengue fever as well. Different mosquito, but again, mosquito-borne.
Are the medical staff, I guess, more careful about? I mean, you must, like, if you're the one doctor there, you must be afraid of getting sick. I mean, do you become extra careful about everything, like just because not wanting to let the team down, kind of thing? Is it that kind of thing in the back of your mind, or? Oh,
for sure. Yes. I mean, you're conscious of, well, certainly malaria. I mean, it's a bad disease, and you practice what you preach. Is that what you're saying? For sure. Yeah. So but malaria is regarded as an administrative thing, really, around the medical thing. So, in other words, the digs themselves were supervised by the sergeants to take the precautions: sleeves down, nets up, take the pill. So it wasn't a matter of the doc saying, look, this is a good idea. It was actually supervised.
Now, so just talk me through the first few weeks, I guess. Like, what sort of things were people presenting with in the sick parades?
Well, even earlier that, we had, unfortunately, our first casualty that first night of that first operation. And to make it worse, is a national serviceman. So that really was a huge reality check. Here's a digger killed first night, happens to be a national serviceman, and that had big political backwash in Australia. I didn't see him. That happened about a kilometre away, so it was night time, and I wasn't able to get there, but. We had the corporal medical assistant there who treated him, and he was evacuated, fairly quickly, but he died. So, No, well then, well the next day we had a guy had a tree fall on him, and he had an abdominal wound from that, and I had to look after him overnight. And so I just had his hoochie put up next to mine, and I gave him painkillers, and he's obviously in a bad way. I'd worry he'd had a ruptured spleen, but then he was then shipped out the following morning by helicopter.
How did a tree fall on him?
I think it was they were clearing an area for a chopper pad. So yeah, that was not very good. Otherwise, no. Had a guy had terrible hives, and which you can get from insect bites, or and other guys had again really the same sort of things. You see a large number of people. There's the odd one bound to get the odd dose of bronchitis, or just feel crook. Fevers. We had a lot of fevers, not all of which were anything terrible, but they'll obviously be crook for maybe a couple of days. Obviously some virus encountered, and you just treat them symptomatically. If it went on long enough or they're sick enough, you'd evacuate them.
So things like flu and fevers
Yep.
and that sort of thing. I mean, who makes a decision that, well, actually they're too sick to go on patrol? I mean,
I would.
And because I mean we've heard about diggers in World War II like having to just keep fighting
Yep.
malaria and stuff like that.
Yes.
I mean,
Well, they didn't have any choice.
How was it different in Vietnam? Yeah, how was it different in Vietnam?
Well, we were lucky. So we had so if somebody were really crook, then he'd be actually a liability in the lines, because somebody had to go and feed him and so on. And so we had a little bit of resting up in the lines, and but really no more than about, say, 48 hours. If somebody wasn't coming good in that time, and then I'd ship them out. So and that took the burden off the rest of the digs, and there's a good chance. So if he were obviously brewing up malaria, then you get that sorted out fairly quickly. So nobody actually went on patrol really crook. That just didn't happen, or badly injured for that matter. We had the ability to get people out quickly. So it's a matter of is a decision. Is this guy just got a dose of bronchitis? He can continue taking some antibiotics and go out, or is he going to be a nuisance? If you're in an ambush position, you can't have some digger coughing, for example. They're no good.
Okay. And what about injuries where someone would just go back to a hospital and recover and then rejoin
Yep.
the battalion versus, going home?
Yeah.
Like, is that something that's not necessarily made by you in the field, but probably by...
There was a policy for the force. So if somebody had slim chance of getting back into action within a month, they'd come home. Because it's pointless, if you're going to be, you don't want people convalescing for a couple of months when the whole tour was only 12 months. So if there's a good prospect of, fixing them within a month, they'd look up and down on the beach to the hospital. There's this lovely term, the HOMA. Have you probably heard of the HOMA? This is an illness or a wound good enough to get you home. So people used to talk wistfully about that a bit. So if you want to get an injury which would, not enough to disable you for life, but to get you home, that is nice. We used to joke about it.
What's a nice HOMA?
Well, if you say broke a leg, any fracture, you're not going to be back in the front line. You're right. So if say a gunshot wound which was significant, with needing a lot of rehab, then they'll be back.
Now, at what point did these young, fit fighting men discover that it was not really a game? I guess it was pretty serious. Was it after that first soldier was killed, or was it a bit longer?
I think for that his company, it was that moment, yeah, for sure. This is fair income, and war is an adventure for sure. For young men, centuries they go for war, and then there's a big reality check, and so you just have to see one of your mates. And of course, you know, in a platoon, 30 guys, in a section, 10 guys, it is a very intimate, you know, relationship. They know each other very well, and so when that happened, that was a huge blow, huge, and so that's serious.
Do you remember when those men came back to? I mean, do you remember seeing them?
Oh yeah, I'd always try to get around, to get out to the sharp end as much as possible. Not simply. Well, I think it's a good morale thing to see the doc out there, and a lot of people like to have a chat, but you could sense that some people were getting quite wobbly after an experience like that. And often you could help them along just with a bit of a chat, and so really never really. Once or twice I would get some guy out of that frontline setting if you can see, obviously, you know, they're getting very wobbly, but most of them, the sense of loyalty to their mates overcame that. You know, they knew that, okay, they felt terrible, but their mates probably felt terrible as well. And to walk out on them just because you're feeling terrible was, you know, you're bad form.
So what was, I guess, your first reality check?
My first one was going and attend a group of digs who had been mortared, and you know, there were a couple killed and a couple wounded, and yeah, it was terrible, frightful, because the whole thing's a lot dirtier and messier than all the first aid. You can see all the first aid programs in the world, but when you see actually you know, wounded soldiers in pain, dead soldiers, it was terrible. But you know, somehow you manage to sort of dissociate from that and just get on and do it. But it's afterwards you get hit very hard afterwards, and that you know, those early experiences took a lot of digesting.
How far into your tour did that reality check happen?
Oh, within a week, but very early, yeah, for sure. And a lot of the wounded, in a lot of cases in battalions, the doc himself didn't see an awful lot of the wounded because of helicopter evacuation. So it may be, if you have a company, say 2K away, the chopper would beat you to it if you, and you may not see it. But I in fact, just through good luck or bad luck, depending on how you look at it, I saw 2/3 of our casualties before they evacuated.
Just from an archive perspective, it's kind of important for us to try and get as much detail as we can to build a picture of things.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if it's not too much to ask, could I get you to, I guess, give us a bit of a picture from your experience on the ground of what your first reality check was like, and just in terms of, you know, the call you might have got, and then arriving there, and who was where and what, and what you did, and, you know, amongst the mud and the wet and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
or what it was like.
It's always there's the different incidents get a bit blurred in your mind, but your impression of how dirty everything is. Explosions create a huge amount of dust and smoke, and these are mortar bombs, and so the digs are dusty and blackened. And in amongst that was a question of finding the wound, which it was often not hard actually, but large, messy wounds set in the background of black, dusty skin, torn uniforms in the middle of the scrub. So what my job really was to sort out who needed what and when. So if say two dead, that's ceased to be a problem. A couple slightly wounded, and then a couple of badly wounded. So you go straight to the badly wounded because they're the ones who need the attention, and it was then a matter of stopping bleeding. That's top of the priority, and because there's no problem with breathing, but bleeding, and applying shell dressings, which are these heavy pads of gauze, which you can tie onto a limb, for example, or around a torso. And it's administering some pain relief, and mercifully the helicopter evacuation would be there within certainly half an hour. So the whole thing was, each incident really was mercifully brief, and so you ship out the say that to the minor wounds. I just took them back to where my RAP was, and they need some stitching. The dead and the wounded, badly wounded, they were helicoptered out within half an hour, that sort of thing. And then, of course, you've got the collateral damage, as they say nowadays, of the mates of the wounded, and in a way they were sort of as much a problem as the wounded themselves, but they had their own way of dealing with that. So I mean, this is where in a unit like that, they do give each other huge support, and so it's very, very seldom necessary to actually intervene as a doc in that setting. You just really show comfort, put an arm around somebody, and they get on with themselves. So and that pattern then, except on one big mine incident, that was the usual pattern. Sort of, you've got who's dead, who's he will, he won't, he may. That's the sort of the classification you've got to do to work out what needs to be done then.
Yeah, can I ask this from a technical perspective? And it might sound like a really obvious question, but saying that the initial mortar incident and things like that, where you've got, I guess a fairly large open injury.
Yeah.
How do you, and you've just got basically a field kit on you, how do you actually stop what I imagine would be like quite extensive bleeding?
Sometimes not possible. That's right. I mean, some. I had one patient on a different incident who was shot through the neck. He was lying down, shot through the neck, and that's obviously it severed the great vessels in the base of the neck. I mean, there's no way, even if he was sitting in an emergency room in the hospital, no way he could have been saved. And he died over about 20 minutes because it was inaccessible, and that was terrible for sure. But I think you just do what you can. You're just a bloke out on the paddock with somebody who's been horribly wounded. Fortunately, he'll be on an operating table within half an hour. And this is why, say, in the Vietnam War, in the hospitals, they saw people who formerly never survived, never got that far, simply because the evacuation was too slow. So it is really just a patch-up job. I mean, I don't think I ever actually saved a life. It was just really patch up, prioritize, and out. That is about it. Painkillers.
I'm sure a few of the fellows you treated probably had a different opinion.
Yeah, but I think they like to believe you did. You saved someone, but in my own mind, I think maybe I saved one guy. But it's this chap I had to escort on a helicopter to Saigon. He is pilot of a helicopter crashed. Just he's coming to actually pick me up, and he just crashed about a few hundred meters up the road. So he had a head injury, but otherwise, most of them are just workout. Is a spurting blood vessel, something like that, or but really just it could have been done by anybody really with basic first aid. So and I think the presence of a doctor there was, it is good for the morale. I mean, the digs like to see a doc for sure. It does make them feel better, but it didn't actually accomplish very much.
Well, I mean, going back to what you were saying of your Christian Scientist mate, and the whole belief.
Yeah.
Having a doc around probably
it does.
Done quite a few wonders.
Yeah, a lot of the digs mentioned on other events how they felt a huge sense of relief when they saw me on the scene, and because somehow you get imbued with a sort of magical power which you don't have, and it's more powerful than just their own, say, medic who would have done the job just as well, for sure.
Yeah. Can you talk us through, I guess, just getting to know the area that you were sort of generally operating in? Because I mean, you mentioned that you sort of would travel around a lot and not spend too much time at base sometimes.
Yeah.
So I guess just what that was like and what you got up to there. I mean, without necessarily going into the detail of certain ops. So I guess just about getting to know the country itself.
Well, the battalion headquarters would travel around. So the battalion headquarters was the commanding officer and the adjutant and intelligence officer and about 50 odd bods, battlements and so on, and you would travel along with them. So just marching in single file, and marching there meant like an ultra slow bushwalk. So you'd cover maybe, a K in an hour. So very, very slow, because that's the way patrols move very slowly. So you'd have the companies patrolling around you, either close or distance. And then you'd perch, you'd often find yourself standing, in the there just with your backpack on for sort of 10 minutes, then you'd move on again, and then you'd be at your destination, wherever that might be. Could be in a rubber plantation or surrounded by banana trees or something like that, and then this would be then your spot for the night, and the battalion headquarters was a circle about sort of 50 meters wide, and you have the digs around the edge, and you put up your hutchie where you're told to put up your hutchie by the RSM, and there you were for the night, and then, so out on operations, that was the pattern. The battalion headquarters would move a bit. The companies didn't move much more. They'd be sort of patrolling much more wide area around, and the battalion headquarters would be sort of controlling the whole operation, and moving sort of more or less in amongst them. And so we saw some of the digs used to joke it as a nature ramble. One day you'd be sitting in amongst the banana plantation. The next time they'd be in some forest, and so it was really, it had its aesthetic aspect, and we had we've always enjoyed camping, and this is camping with a difference. You put up your hutchie and you have the long nights, the tropical nights, 12 hours, and you had nothing to do really. Just there's no lights, so you just put up a hutchie and go to bed. You couldn't read, you couldn't talk to anybody, and this is in the early stage when we were actually out on the bush all the time, and then so very long nights. Had this system of stand to. Are you familiar with that at all?
I do.
Where the whole battalion would stand to for at that half hour before, half hour after both sunset and sunrise, and so you'd just be sitting out there on the ground, and your eyes adjusting to the changing light. And it's actually a lot of time for thinking, and it's quite meditative. I quite enjoyed it. Then during the daytime, there's nothing doing. You might be just perched in a spot there while the companies are patrolling out at a distance. Nothing much happening. Read and write.
Did you ever feel, I guess, a little bit unsafe or unprotected, given that all you had was a pistol? Once you sort of realised how dangerous the country was?
Well, the day the doc gets shot at, you're in trouble. So that didn't happen to us. So because you're with battalion headquarters, you're not really strictly the sharp end. But in Vietnam, there's no sort of front line. But no, when we first settled down, that first few first couple of weeks on that first operation, there was people there were a few nights where we were under threat of imminent attack by this Viet Cong regiment, which is about 8 kilometers up the road, and so that was quite scary. And but the digs, in their usual way, were actually they were spoiling for a fight. They wanted to have a big time fight, but it was, there's big numbers of them up there, and we were there, and all we happened we were just perched in this rubber plantation. So, that was quite scary. But that Viet Cong regiment, they got distracted by one of the U.S. spotter aircraft had been shot down just up the road, and they all went off there to ambush that because they thought we'd go out and and investigate that. But we didn't know where it was, so the battalion didn't go out after that. So their ambush was was for no good at all. So, but there were those early days was quite scary, but also exciting. This is one of the paradoxes of it all. So as long as you're, it's a balance between you can't have the adventure without the scary. But of course, as time goes by, the scary eventually totally outweighed the adventure, and about 3 months of that was fine. I would have been happy to come home then.
And what about, locals? I mean, did you spend much time in local villages?
Yeah, we did. Yes, so we had they had this a medical civil aid program, which was underlying it was this idea of winning hearts and minds, which people now sort of very cynical about. But the idea was certainly to here you've got a dock available, so we used to trot down to the villages and set up a little aid post there and treat the locals, for an afternoon or morning. And it is a bit token because their problems are much bigger. I mean, they had malaria and hookworm and TB and so on, the things that no doc can treat out of his backpack. But no, we did. Things like, say, skin infections, for example, you could fix. We incised a whacking great abscess on a baby, so again, the locals liked it for sure. Some of them we'd see maybe 100 patients in a couple of hours, and it really. It was a bit of a bun rush, but we did do a lot of that. So we did some of these coordinate searches where, say, a village would be cordoned off by the battalion, and the company would search the whole place and fish out the bad guys and weapons and so on. And we would set up a shop at the same time and treat whoever came by.
Did you ever have to treat any local Vietnamese who'd been, harassed by the VC?
It's impossible to tell, wouldn't it? No, it wouldn't. I saw a kid who had been wounded in an airstrike. That was our US airstrike. But no, nothing identifiable. You couldn't really tell who the good guys were and the bad guys at all. Totally inscrutable.
So how did that translate for you on the ground, going into these villages and having to operate on a day-to-day basis where you can't really tell who's friend or foe?
Well, it doesn't really matter if you're a doctor, does it? You you treat whoever rolls up. So you get some old granny with a bad cough, and she's probably got TB, and might give her some cough mixture or something. But they're as I say, a lot of it was just token stuff, and this is a public health problem. You say that they had no means of controlling their TB and malaria and so on. So he just probably did some more good than harm, I imagine. But it was very popular, and then and some of those coordinate searches, the band would set up and play music, and they eventually learned some Vietnamese music, and they had handouts of rice and so on, and so it was, and then they had little engineering projects got underway eventually, and to put down sort of water stands and so on?
Yeah, I guess you're in a bit of a unique position because you kind of got to watch a lot of this sort of happen, as I said, go into a village. Can you give us a bit of a picture on, I guess, for want of a better word, what a typical village would look like and how the company would actually cordon it off and kind of protect what they're doing, and before, as you'd set up and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, the villages varied a lot in their standard. There was a couple of villages were made up entirely of refugees from North Vietnam who came down as an intact village complete with village priest, and they'd set up really a very good sort of good hygiene and well-run show. At the other end of the spectrum, some were just dirt poor, really, really flimsy palm huts with terrible hygiene, and so it was quite a variety in that way. And but the cordon and search, the idea was to creep up on a village and have a cordon in place before first light, so that the troops were around, so nobody would enter or leave, and ideally do it without the locals knowing it, which was quite hilarious. And then with that cordon intact, then one company then moved through the village and just house to house search. And so the first of these ones was almost high comedy, because we're all we had to have sort of deception plans, setting off APCs in this direction, and the armoured personnel carriers, and we went off in another direction and hid in the one bit of the rubber plantation, and then set off then at about 1 a.m, pitch black, and we put a little blob of phosphorescent material, decaying vegetation on the back of on the shirt of the guy in front of me, so you could see where he was. And we're all actually roped together with toggle ropes, which was, as you can imagine, doing this with a couple hundred guys was asking a lot. And but it actually worked. We surprised this village, and we had this at 5 o'clock in the morning. We had this cordon around the village, and without anybody being aware of it, and it was very successful. And so we did this same drill. We repeated it several times on different villages.
And would they often find stashes of bits and people?
Yeah, they'd usually get, say, a village of say a few hundred people. They'd fish out a couple of dozen suspects who then be handed over to the Vietnamese army, because our job was really just to do the search with interpreters and some Vietnamese army types. And then the suspects were being handed over to the Vietnamese army at the province headquarters, and then we'd move on. We'd done our stuff there. So that was low key. See, the Americans like big time war. They want to sort of kick ass all the time and have set piece battles. Australia, having had its Malaya experience, they're used to the guerrilla thing, where you do concentrate on low-key patrolling and this cordon and search type of operation. And really, it in that setting, it was successful. But it's quite an adventure, though, wandering along pitch black with. We had on this first occasion, the lead guy fell down a well. He fell down, and fortunately there's a beam across the bottom which he narrowly missed, and there's full of water. And he was fished out. They had to tie a whole lot of toggle ropes together to fish him out. So there's no blackness like the blackness of a tropical night under that canopy of the rubber plantation, because it's quite dense, and it's quite hilarious. I really enjoyed it.
I guess what about tunnel systems and things like that. Did you sort of come across those or have to deal with those in any way?
No, the engineers were the ones, and you've got to take your hat off to them. The sappers, they got down with a torch and a pistol, and I saw one of the tunnel systems after it all been sorted out, but no, it is extraordinary. Yes, I had no direct experience of that.
You talked earlier this morning about how, because you were fairly raw going into Vietnam, and, it was a very sharp learning curve. I guess I was curious to get you to speak about, what for you were the first, the first sort of key things that were part of that steep learning curve for you, in terms of what they were and how you kind of dealt with them.
Well, I was very keen to get to know as many, get to know. I mean, that's you're much more effective if you mean something to them, they mean something to you. So I worked quite hard at that, and then trying to sort out, the stream of problems on the sick parade. Who's really crook, and this is what every young doctor has quite a struggle with at first, anyway. And is this guy really crook? Is he's got something fairly mild? He's going to get over all by himself. Does he need treatment? Does he need to be evacuated? For example, I had one old warrant officer, old by the way, meant over about 35, who had chest pain. Now, was this a coronary or just indigestion? That sort of stuff, which an experienced GP would work out reasonably well. And with that guy, in fact, I played safe and evacuated him. And turned out it was nothing. So I did make mistakes like that for sure. But just trying to work out, that's actually a huge responsibility. I mean, you've got young lives. It's a judgment. And judgment you only acquire from experience. Experience you acquire from time. And so I had none of that behind me, really. And it was a lot of seat of the pants stuff, and I'm sure a lot of crook judgments were made, but just did the best you can, and I'm sure it got better as time went by. So after a while, you could tell, but once you especially got to know the digs, you could say, well, look, this guy, he's cracking harder, he's really sicker than he's making out to be. There was a lot of that. A lot of the digs did not want to let their mates down. They could be sick as a dog and actually want to go out on patrol with their mates so as not to let them down. And so sometimes you had to put your foot down there, and very occasionally the other way around. There's some people who are not as crook as they thought. So that was a constant test.
Because, a doctor or padre is very often a counsellor, very much as well. So,
sure.
Did you have to deal with, or did you see evidence of
oh, yeah. No, in fact, I've got two sort of opposite ends of the spectrum there. One was a bloke who had actually, I went out to this company's exhibition, and he was very frightened. He had a terrible time, but he was very frightened. And the unwritten text of our conversation was, get me out of here, I need a break. And so I gave him the sort of standard spiel about, you can't let your mates down, and, not long to go, all this sort of stuff. And he did actually, so I reluctantly persuaded him, said he wanted to get out back to the base and have a break. And in fact, he got shot that night. And but he wasn't killed. There's a chest wound, minor chest wound. And so a couple of days later, I went down to the hospital, and with fear and trepidation, I thought he'd give me a real blast. I went to see him, and he was sitting up there in bed, big bright smile, thrilled to see me, nice honourable wound, and he said he thanked me, for making him, encouraging him to stay, and he saved his self-esteem and all that sort of stuff. So that was a plus. The other end of the spectrum, though, was one guy who was actually one of the stretcher bearers, and he'd had some bad wounds to deal with, things, and he effectively was refusing to go back out, and so I had quite a sort of a long, what is now called counselling. I'm not sure what it's called in those days, chat, and with great ill grace he went back, and he actually tackled me about that very episode when I ran into him actually out in Central Australia just by accident about 30 years later. So he thought I was a real bastard for doing that. So what do you say? I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, you've got to do your duty. Sometimes you don't want to do your duty, and you have your duty to make some judgment. Is this guy absolutely, unsalvageable wreck, nervous wreck, or should he just be encouraged and jollied along and feel better about it later?
And what sort of things, I guess, in your observations, I mean, give you, in those times might have been giving you an indication one way or the other? Like, I mean, where do you kind of draw the line for someone who might be just having a panic attack versus someone who's gone over the edge?
Well, one who obviously went over the edge was a guy who accidentally shot he had an antique gun illegally in the lines, and he accidentally shot his best mate dead with it. Now he was absolutely wrecked, and he was taken out of that shootout for about a couple of weeks, and that was, there's no question about it. He was just a gibbering wreck. But most of the people, you could sense that really just wanted to let off a bit of steam and give them a bit of perspective. You say, okay, look, we're all in this together. Nobody's enjoying this. Ain't long to go. You owe it to your mates. So there is a bit of that moral blackmail, I suppose. But for most of the diggers, I think that their sense of loyalty to the mates was, you hear a lot about mateship and so on, but it is a real thing. And to actually walk out on, you're one bloke in a section of 10, you're 10% of the action there. You can't just shoot through unless you're right at the end of your tether. So most people you could, just with a bit of humane dealing, get them around to sort of stick it out. But I think by the end of the year, most of the people really were at the end of their tether, for sure.
What kind of symptoms would you see in people that had kind of, either seen too much or something too bad? Or?
Well, just a non-specific malaise, body language often poor, just sagging, haggard of eye, hypochondriacal. They're full of symptoms of this and that, back and. In others, nothing you really put your finger on. It's just what you expect from low morale. They're just hammered. They want out. Anything except here, please. And so you could feel a bit of a bastard by. Don't forget there are other people. They could talk to their NCO, their sergeant, their platoon commander. I mean, it's not just the doc. But the ones that I saw, generally, you could sort of just say, look, I agree. This is really crook right now, and you're going through a really bad patch, and ain't going to last forever, and so on. But that was very testing. I mean, it's probably as testing as any physical illness, really. But it must happen in all wars and at all times.
I was speaking to maybe some Vietnam guys, but also some World War II. They tell stories of their mates who would sort of, they'd get all really hyper nervous on a particular day, and not wanting to go out.
Yeah.
And would end up going out and get shot.
Yeah.
Because they just had a bad feeling.
Yeah, sure. They spook themselves.
Yeah.
Yes, I never encountered that. I can see because they knew it was going to happen. Yes. Well, the statistics would show that it's bound to happen occasionally, isn't it? Yeah. No, but it is. I always found that tough because you have a duty to. The first duty of the medical corps is to conserve manpower, and that means, you know, make sure the guy's in the front line if at all possible.
Yeah, it's an amazing paradox in lots
Yeah,
of ways.
it is. Yes, you know, you might be putting somebody in harm's way, which is what you're trained not to do.
Mm. So how do you reconcile it at the time? I guess you've got a job to do.
Well, you say, well, you have a duty to the army, you have a duty to the individual, and most of the time, I think it worked out okay. Maybe that one stretcher bearer, I don't know if he would ever get over that, but I mean, he served out his term, but obviously deeply resentful of it.
Yeah, that wasn't perhaps your fault.
No, I don't. I think it's. I mean, I'm sure I felt every bit as timid and as worried as he was. You know, yeah, I mean, everybody had their times when they feared for their life. You know, it's a question of what do you do about it.
Well, that leads me exactly my next question.
Yeah.
I mean, what were your observations of how different people dealt with fear?
I think it's such an internal thing that I'm sure some people were scared witless without any visible manifestation. So I certainly, you'd often see people shaking badly and crying and so on after some bad event, and which is human. And but this is big on the macho and the stiff upper lip and so on, and we will get over it, you know, we'll get back to base and have a few beers and talk it over, and generally they would, you know, I think it's an episodic thing. So it's not too many people had. I don't think too many people had a lasting dread. They wouldn't have been in a battalion. They'd be more likely down in one of the support units on the beach or something like that. So in a way, sort of getting into battalions, sort of fairly self-selecting people who are fairly gung-ho and eager, and they might find they're bitten off more than they can chew, but they would do it.
But that's where the mateship comes in.
That was huge, yeah, and that's where that is, the morale is as important as any weapons or, you know, technology. Sure.
So did you feel at the time, when you were going out in the field and sort of seeing everybody, that part of what your job was to keep morale up?
Oh, for sure. No question about it. I think if they thought that Doc and the Padre and all of the officers were sort of living up back in the base area while they were out there, then you know, of course, human nature, think, oh, what a bunch of wankers. But actually getting out there and you know, I'd be as filthy as them and so on, and wet through and smelly and so on. And you certainly you're sharing this, you know, and you know, you may not be out there on sentry duty at night, but at least you're living on the ground just like them, eating the same tucker, and often you'd share a meal, and I had a hip flask. I used to give them a swig of my whiskey occasionally. So I'm sure, you know, when you did see them then in trouble, then they'd often be a lot more level with you. You know, if they're sick, for example, you're not a stranger.
So they actually engender an honesty from...
Yeah, I think it's true, yeah. And sometimes you go out in the places where there were wounded troops, and you could but if you knew the digger, you knew how they were reacting, you know, whether they were overreacting or underreacting to. So that was quite a help then in assessing what the hell's going on, for sure. You weren't amongst strangers.
What about, were there many friendly fire incidents at all?
Yeah. A lot. It's a very sensitive area, and it's probably is a no-go area for the doctor to talk about, because I wouldn't know the exact detail, but I know it happened a lot. In fact, the first casualty with that was friendly fire, and which of course makes the whole thing a lot worse.
Is it pretty obvious when it's a friendly fire? Does everyone pretty much know?
I think in retrospect, when they reconstruct it, I mean, it obviously, say a mortar dropping in, where does that come from? And that took take some time to work out. That gunshot wound, that was 2 companies that were at their boundary, or patrol boundary. They had a party, went down to the creek to get water, and that was at dusk, first night, and that was so that was, I think that was pretty obvious. Another episode where just a minor gunshot wound, but this was often say one patrol marching into a fixed base. You see, and everybody's so jumpy, at least in the early days, and I think there was a lot of friendly fire stuff earlier on, less later. But it's the sort of thing people, relatives of people who are killed or wounded, who hate to hear about it. I mean, I really don't know the detail of the incidents enough to be able to comment on. I would happily flick past that one to the real soldiers, the military historians.
What about other kinds of injuries? Like, were there ever any burns or?
No, I had a call one morning to a couple of guys chucked. Somehow a couple of grenades got chucked down in a pit. There's the fire. They got sprayed with that, but no, that was the only sort of accident. And of course, that gunshot wound with of a young fellow shooting his mate accidentally. But otherwise, no, that we had no burns, which is surprising, really, since there's plenty of flammable material around. The showers, for example, when we had them set up, they were heated with petrol running through a 44-gallon drum. A bit primitive, but no, none of that really. A lot of people fall, say, walking around in the dark when we first there was pitch black, and people had dug weapons pits and so on, and you get a lot of sort of knee and so on injuries from people falling into those, but otherwise not really.
What about foot injuries and I guess, what were the boots like that the soldiers were wearing? Because I suppose feet are a bit of an ongoing problem for soldiers.
As important as the stomach, that's right. They by the time they got there, they were broken their boots in pretty well, and the boots are very good. I mean, they were those leather sort of calf-length boots, and they had steel plate in them for those panji stakes. You probably heard of these spiked bamboo stakes, which are used, which if you had just a leather sole would go straight through that. People who are out on patrol for a few days, they get very soggy, but that is fixed just by drying out for a couple of days.
Did you have all kinds of foot powders and things like that?
Yeah, tinea powders. So everything grows beautifully in the tropics, including fungus, and so tinea is big. And skin was by far the commonest problem I'd see all the time, which probably triggered me off in the direction of dermatology. But and of course I knew nothing about that either at the time. So, but infection in the early days, prickly heat was a huge problem, and there's nothing to do about that except get air conditioned, and that didn't exist. And but skin on the feet, no, that was usually a problem of early days of training when they were getting used to their boots. But by that time, it wasn't really a big deal. Tinea easily fixed.
What about you maintaining your medical supplies? Like, how would you order things, and how long would it take to get to you in the field?
Well, we're supposed to take a 3-month supply with us on the way up, and then you would then there's another job for the RAP staff sergeant. He would keep an eye on supplies, and there are certain sort of agreed usage rates for different things, and you're supposed, in theory, to stay within those, and you've got a bit of a sort of a ticking off if you use too much of certain thing, and because they had to work on some sort of scale to make it manageable. So when things are running low, he'd just reorder. So there was a resupply from Vung Tau, from the back beach there, logistics support group. So he'd just put in for it, and they'd send it up. And then out in the bush, when you're out on operations, if I wanted something, say I needed some penicillin or something, that'd often come out on a chopper sometimes even the same day, or within a couple of days anyway. So that we were actually pretty well off in that way. We weren't too short on medication.
Now, this morning you showed me a pretty old bandage. Can you tell us about some of how old some of these supplies were that you were using in Vietnam?
Well, that's a shell dressing, and it's date stamped April 1915, which is a key date in Australian military history, and I've got a great sentimental attachment to that. But that was our issue of shell dressings and field dressings, and these are essentially a big wad of gauze with ties stitched onto them and a little vial of iodine. And so the digs each carried a small and a field dressing, which is about half that size for a smaller wound. I also carry a dozen or so of those big ones in my pack, and you'd whack that on a dressing on a wound, and I mean they were as good as new. I mean they were then 60 years old. Is that right? 50 years? Yeah, 50 years old, but they were fine. So the rest of the kit, we had some ancient Thomas splints for fractured femurs we had back in the RAP. We didn't take them out of bush, but they're also just a big splint. We go for the whole leg for a fracture. They would have been very ancient. My tracheotomy set that was probably World War II or so, but it doesn't matter. We're never. I don't think anybody actually suffered as a result of ancient or insufficient equipment. I can't recall a single instance. See, dressing is a dressing, and it's just a decent water as long as it's sterile, and that could still be used.
Just talking about, keeping things sterile. I mean, you mentioned before that, when you go to a scene where there's been a lot of wounded and so forth, that it's very dirty and everything. I mean, for men who are trying to save their mates' lives and they're putting their hands inside the wounds and that, I mean, how great is that risk of infection from something like that?
Well, they're already grossly contaminated from blast. They're full of dirt and twigs and rubbish. So a human hand is not going to compromise that. And when they get to the hospital, they would be thoroughly, the whole area thoroughly cleaned out. They'd be on antibiotics. So, the first thought is to save a life. That means stopping bleeding. Stopping bleeding means pressure. Pressure means with whatever you've got. And if that happens to be even, say, a folded up shirt, it's just compressed against whatever's. There's no avoiding that, and so you can't get too precious about that. Everybody's filthy out there. Nobody's had a shower for a week or so, and so you assume that everything's contaminated.
You mentioned earlier today, I think, that somebody got bitten by a snake. What kind of?
No, we didn't have any snake bite. It was a scorpion, yes, but no, didn't have any snake bites. Which is surprising, really. I had quite a snake collection. The digs would bring them in, and I had no way of identifying them, so I just collected them waiting for some book to identify them. It never happened. Unfortunately, we never had any snake bite, which is surprising. You've got people lying down in leaf-strewn things overnight and so on. Nice, warm
did you
body.
have antivenins then,
No.
or how would you have treated something like that?
Well, in those days, I think it was just a tourniquet and hope for the best. Nowadays it's compression, and you still have to identify the snake. And the first rule in the army book on snake bite was catch and identify the snake. They caught and identified a lot of snakes, but fortunately nobody ever got bitten. I was amazed. I was waiting for it for sure. I would have had a collection of about a dozen different snakes by the end of the year.
They obviously killed them? So you just had them all in jars?
And I tried to get a book on local snakes, but impossible to come by.
If it's all right, we might just sort of move to some of your operations now, sure. Like within your time there. The first one I've got down to ask you about is Operation Sydney.
All right.
What can you tell us about that?
Operation Sydney was that was nothing spectacular. We were just parked really in a nice orchard, some of the orchard in headquarters, while the companies were doing patrolling around. So there was nothing exceptional about that. So just got out around the companies, and it was business as usual. That was quite unexceptional, really.
So what sort of, I guess, medical treatment were you giving to people?
Again, just the standard stuff. There's really nothing apart from the usual GP stuff. That was a pretty uneventful operation from what I recollection. I don't remember the details that much. I just remember our nice orchard where we were with all the fruit trees and so on. Good spot to stay. Nothing much to do. And it is just a patrol, companies patrolling around that particular real estate.
I've just got a note from our researcher that you resuscitated a VC in a village.
Oh, right, yeah. That was one of our cordons on that. That was part of that. That's right. So it was a village cordon, and this guy was he's just a teenager. He tore off down a tunnel, and somebody they chucked in some gas to get him out. The CS gas was the tear gas, and he came out, but he's perfectly okay. He was actually very imperturbable. Actually, I asked him how he's feeling. He said he's feeling tired, and so but he got up on his feet again, and he just got marched off to the. So he didn't actually need resuscitation. He was he looked a bit seedy when he's fished out, simply because of the tear gas, which then we all got all over ourselves as well. So we just all joined the throng. But no, there was no drama there at all. He didn't actually need resuscitation. He was just down a tunnel, got gassed, fished out, and marched off.
Mm-hmm. What about in August, Operation Darlinghurst?
Remind me a bit of that now.
You gave some medical attention to the people in Bimbar.
Oh, right, yes. That is one of our MedCap things. So that is heroic. That's right. We had several days of these clinics, and huge. I think one day it could even be there's another doc with me and medicists and so on. I think we saw about 700 in a day. It is the stampede.
That's a phenomenal amount of people to attend to.
It's ridiculous, just ridiculous. And in a way, it's a sort of a it is evidently a gimmick. You know, it's really there's no way you can give attention to, particularly the deep problems. The public health problems. Nutrition was crook. They're all anemic. They're full of hookworm and malaria, and I think probably about 10% of the population had TB. So that sort of thing. They're all fronted up, but some of the minor things, like obvious skin infections and so on, you could treat. But it really was just it makes good film footage, but really doesn't. In the big picture, it is a public relations stunt. And I felt that about a lot of those. They were very limited medical value. Everybody ended up nice, warm, fuzzy feeling, but without really achieving anything.
So what did you and the other doctor do? I mean, in terms of your strategy on when you're faced with that, you know that
Had
you
an
can't.
interpreter. Yeah.
You can't possibly really help. I mean,
That's right.
So how do you treat each person?
Well, we had an interpreter and just asked them what's wrong with them, and they'd have cough or what else, headache or just sick, and often we'd just give them some vitamins or some cough mixture and let them pass. I mean, that's all you could do. I mean, in theory, what you do if you get somebody who's, say, a middle-aged person but who's obviously hugely anemic, you get a blood test done, find out what type of anemia, check them out for worms, X-ray chest and so on. But none of that is available. So it is really just a sort of show and tell thing. But the odd one, the odd person you could do something for, you could, if it was something which was, I would see amongst the diggers, for example, say skin infections, you could treat that for sure. But I think it's such a novelty that we just had a huge roll up, and they came along and got seen, and everybody felt better. And went on their way.
How much contact did you have with other doctors while you were in Vietnam? Just in, professionally, and just being able to talk about things.
We had one meeting of the Nui Dat Medical Association, which was the 4 of us doctors. We managed to get one reliever out from the beach, and we all got terribly drunk, and we lost the minutes of the meeting. So, I was sent down to the beach for a month because I had bronchitis myself. I was quite crook, and I worked for the hospital there for that month, and that was quite good because I could see then, their end of the spectrum. There's always a bit of paranoia between the people at the sharp end and the people back behind the front. So I laid a lot of that, and I could see how our casualties were being, treated and handled. And but no, and I had a bit to do with a French doctor who was the company doctor for the rubber plantation. There was actually a working rubber plantation just up north of the Nui Dat area. And so we did the odd joint clinic together. It was quite handy because he had a good knowledge of the local local disease pattern. And they actually had a hospital about 10 miles away. So some of the people working on the plantation, they got quite good treatment there. But otherwise, no, it was really you're on your own for sure. I mean, there's no mentor, no sort of wise old chap looking over your shoulder.
It seems in many ways a fairly lonely job being the battalion doctor. I mean, did you ever have times when you just sort of thought, I wish I had have been back in a bigger sort of base hospital and been able to be part of that whole medical team? I mean, what are the pros and cons for both of those? You were on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so you couldn't get drunk. You had to be there, had to be accessible. Yes, you had to. It was lonely making decisions for sure. On the other hand, in my month down on the beach, the hospital, I couldn't wait to get back. I felt, that's where my loyalties lay there. I felt, and you do get quite possessive about your job. This is my battalion. What's this guy doing in my battalion? And so. You're caught between that. It is tough, but you would not do. I think it's one of the greatest jobs any young doctor can do. There's nothing to compare with it. It's into the deep end, but with huge potential. I mean, that a lot of people depend on you, and you probably do a lot more good than harm for sure. So I loved it. You wouldn't do it again. Once is plenty. So what was it like coming back after a month away? I mean, did it feel like more than a month, or was it? Had anything happened while you were gone? Was it just?
No, it was sort of. It was that sort of. It was a fairly quiet time. So nothing, an awful lot happened. So I was just back into it again, and then. It wasn't calm for very long though. We ended up badly with our last operation. But no, I was pleased to get back, like coming home. So on the beach, I felt that so a lot of those sort of psychiatric problems from Vietnam, I think they're much more prevalent in the people who are not at the sharp end. So people in the base area, they drank too much, they got too bored, they had a lot of time on their hands. They didn't have that sort of esprit de corps because if you're working, say, for some resupplied depot, it's a totally different ambience to working in a battalion where you're all in it together. So I, in a way, I think their job is tougher. Not as dangerous, but just they would have got bored rigid, for sure.
Having sort of gone through it all, is one doctor enough per battalion?
Oh yes, yeah, for sure. So especially, you see, you've got backup. I mean, if I had somebody's really crook, you just get on a helicopter and he's out. You see, so in that sense, and 800 people, I mean, a GP can service 2,000 or so ordinary people. So that's okay. I mean, some of the situations I got into, I was utterly overwhelmed. But you're not going to have several doctors sitting around waiting for that to happen. So.
Might just move now to Operation Crow's Nest. Do you remember that one? There's a wounded man in a chopper.
Ah, yes, yeah. This is the pilot. Is it talking about now? I can.
Might be a pilot.
I had one. I don't know. It's Crow's Nest. I think
No, that was Operation Robin.
Right. There's a chap who was forward scout who was shot, and he was obviously mortally wounded. But I took him back down to the hospital in Vung Tau. I was it's ridiculous, but I gave him mouth to mouth all the way. But he's very dead on arrival. But I mean, here again, in the horror of war, there's always funny things happen. When I got off the helicopter, the chopper pad of the U.S. hospital, this big black U.S. sergeant picked me up because he thought I was a casualty because I was covered with blood. So I had to protest vigorously, say, "Look, put me down. I'm okay." But so you get constantly this juxtaposition of something absolutely horrible with something utterly ridiculous, and these sort of things happen. Yeah.
So with that man that you eventually sort of accompanied on the dust-off chopper, I mean, just talk us through, getting the call, going out there, how you assess his condition, and who calls in the dust-off choppers and all that sort of process.
Immediately somebody's wounded, the platoon commander would call it, or the company commander would call a dust-off chopper. So that's about 20-minute call time. And if I were in Kui, as I quite often was then, this guy got up, I think I was only about a K or so away, and I hopped up there on a jeep, and his guy was gunshot wound to the chest. He had it really. He was still alive. So and the chopper would have been there within a quarter of an hour. So I just piled on board with him, and away we went. We're down on the landing pad within 20 minutes. But
so was he unconscious the whole time?
Yeah. No, he was alive when I got him on board, and he would have died on the flight. Because it's so on a helicopter. I don't know if you've been, you can't make any sense of what's going on with a patient. You can't even tell whether they're breathing because vibration, it's noisy, and stethoscope doesn't do anything. So I just, it is really, again, just sort of, sort of desperate, sort of zero hope type of action. But you wouldn't do it any otherwise, would you?
I spoke to another Australian who actually worked with the Americans in the dust-off choppers, and he was talking about how the rules are that you have to, basically your job is to first protect the helicopter and so forth, and then the patient is second, even though everything inside you says look after the patient straight away. Is it different for, because I think he was more of a medic rather than a soldier, rather than a doctor. He wasn't a doctor. Is there any protocol like that for doctors, or you're always firstly for the patients?
Should the doctor be there, you mean?
Danger? No, like in that situation, say that chopper was under fire or something. I mean, what would you be expected to be picking up the gun before looking after the patient?
No.
Like what?
Doctors don't shoot. No, the patient. Yeah, I see there are plenty of other people around to have a shooting war. No, I'd focus entirely on the patient for sure. I can't imagine any situation where doctors actually picked up a weapon in Vietnam and had a crack at anything. That'd be truly desperate. Yeah.
What are some of the other, operations that you were involved with that really stick out?
Well, that Operation Queen Bee, and I don't know if that rings a bell on your list, but that was a very tough one. It was on the boys call the Warburton Mountain, which is actually this. We're moving up this side of this steep hill, and it is very heavily timbered, big forested timber, and these huge rocks about the size of transport containers, and one of the officers got shot. He's very lucky. Actually, the bullet actually hit the stock of his machine gun, and so he only just sort of a fairly surface wound. But I went up there to dress him and to dress the wound and so on. So we were huddled there behind a rock, and that was a shooting war there. So one of the guys beside him put his head up to see what was going on, and he got his hat shot off. So that was about as close as I got to being shot, but I was not in any immediate danger. But at that same incident, we had this other guy shot through the neck. I think I mentioned him earlier, where he had shot through the main blood vessels up there, and he died fairly quickly. And he was. That's just an impossible situation where the defenders were in the box seat, had this prepared positions and this beautifully rocky slope. We were going up the slope. They had the rocks and they knew where they were, and so that was quite frightening for sure. But it's that chap who was wounded. He was lifted out by a helicopter pilot who did a beautiful job reversing his helicopter onto a flat rock in the middle of all this. And you have to take your hat off to him. This Aussie Army chopper pilot, they did some wonderful things. That is my only experience of actually being conscious of being shot at. But
is it quite surreal? I mean, do things go slowly, or does it?
It is unreal. It is unreal for sure. You can't quite believe it, that's happening, and yet the evidence is there right in front of you. So you've got to believe it. And unfortunately, it's unlike, say, older wars. These actions are all very brief. You see that sort of. That shoot 'em up episode, that would have lasted for half an hour or so, that sort of thing. And then we sort of moved on up the hill, and that was it. Whereas in past wars, they've been slugging away, sometimes for days. But this is all quick, over.
Mind you, half an hour under fire would seem like an eternity, I would think.
Well, not if you're sitting behind a rock, which is where I was, which is good. So I think this is where I could hear the platoon all around, shouting their combat instructions. They're the guys you take your hat off to, because they're out there. They're looking for the bad guys. The bad guys looking for them. I was just really I was redundant at that stage, So you just wait until it all moves on, and then move on.
So getting the patient to the chopper that's landed on the rock. Is that where the stretcher bearers come in, or you're accompanying him?
The stretcher bearer is a bit of a misnomer, you see, but they're the medic, really. The stretcher bearer is an old term from World War I, where that's their job. There's a wounded stretcher bearer. They run up there, cut them back to the dock. The stretcher bearers in the battalion now, they are medics. They're no stretchers anyway, so. And there's one per platoon, and they will go, if the guy's wounded, onto him, attend to him straight away, and then maybe fish him out of the fire zone if possible, or just wait until things quieten down and get him out. And so the guy who was chopped out is a sort of improvised stretcher, just out of ponchos and so on.
So if it is sort of all over as quickly as it begins, I mean, just talk me through when you felt safe again after that. I mean, being under fire and feeling seriously threatened for the first time. I mean,
I think you're protected by a big dose of the she'll be right. In other words, that immortality of young people, which. I certainly lost that by the end of the year, but at that time I still felt, you know, heck, I'm a doctor. It's the patients who get wounded, not the doc. You see, so you know, the whole firefight just died down at that time. They when we just moved on up the hill, and it was back to business. You know, it was when we reached where we're getting to after nightfall and put up our hoochies. We're all wrecked. Everybody's tired, but I wasn't conscious of any more fear after that. You know, I thought just, okay, that's today, tough day today, but that's the end of that. Yeah.
And what about finding out about your patients? I mean, how does that information come back to you and to the battalion?
There's quite a good liaison. See, the battalion had a sort of little network down on the beach who would then send a signal up saying, you know, Private X is doing fine. You know, he's had his wounds dressed and so on. He's doing okay. So you'd usually get some sort of feedback within a day or two. You know, but you had a pretty good idea who's going to survive anyway. But so they had to cope with some in the Vietnam War. They had to cope in the hospital with patients who normally would never have made it there. So they had some horrendous injuries who survived, who formerly would have just died out in the field. Simply because it is all, you know, from wounding to getting good resuscitation, you know, fluids in every vein and so on. That could be a matter of, in that they talk about the golden hour from when you're wounded. That's when you've got the best chance of, you know, saving the situation. And they were all in resuscitation within that time. So it was very lucky from the medical point of view. Which means that a lot of horrendously badly wounded people survived.
What about? Did you went on R&R at all?
Yes, I did. Yes, I went to Hong Kong in November of that year. I loved it was bliss, 5 days of bliss, and stayed at a flash pub in Hong Kong. And what I enjoyed there was simply silence and just those sort of comforts. You're like having a carpet under your feet and turn a tap on and hot water comes out. And I had kippers for breakfast every morning, and just goofed off. Very good.
Did you feel safe as soon as you left Vietnam? Does it just fall off you?
Yes, I know. It was a Pan Am charter, I remember, and they made a big effort to, you know, to pay attention to everybody, and that was huge relief. In fact, just getting out of, taking off from Saigon, very good.
It must be surreal to 1 minute be in such danger and then the next.
Utterly bizarre, and but you've in Hong Kong, you know, you've very quickly adjusted to the fact that, you know, you're in paradise. You know, 5 days of. Now, I didn't want to have anything to do with the military. I didn't go with anybody else. I didn't drink up in all the bars of the old diggers. I just went and goofed off, you know, and had quiet time. Because you spend so much time, you know, in the army. You don't have an awful lot of time to yourself. You know, you just people around you all the time, and it was just to have the luxury and silence. Beautiful.
What are the highlights from that R&R for 5 days?
I think it was just existing, you know, just you know, I didn't tear up, you know, the town at all. I didn't get drunk or go with loose women. I just had a total relaxed, total brain and neutral.
What was it like being in a nice bed for a change?
Very, very good, yes. I've heard of diggers who couldn't sleep in beds, they had to lie on the floor, but that didn't happen to me at all. I was very happy. Yeah. And
did the 5 days go fast? Or?
Yep. Yeah, too fast. It was all over. I was marching back into the aircraft, you know, before I'd known it. No, it was a glorious time.
Was it harder to go back, or You know.
Yeah, I could sense a sort of a little drag there. You know, not here we go again sort of thing. And no, I wasn't sort of reluctant to come back, but I wasn't rushing to come back. It's not like rushing to get to Vietnam at the start. This would have been a little less enthusiasm.
Because how long did you have to go?
So it was 7 months to go. So it'll be May to May. This is November.
Yeah. Just a couple of more, I guess, questions on other operations that you were in. I think you sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think it was Operation Robin with the. I think there was a chopper pilot who was hit by a sniper. He was on his way to pick you up. Is that?
Yeah. There wasn't actually. It turned out he wasn't hit by a sniper.
Right. Can you kind of just talk us through the moment to moment of that?
Yeah. Well, so we're on a highway holding operation, and he just dropped me off at this one company position. I had a look at some of the diggers, and then he went scooted off up the road to another spot, and then he was going to come back and pick me up and take me on again. It's one of these little two-man reconnaissance helicopters. And as he came whipping down the road at sort of just above the tarmac level, and next thing you see is this thing spearing into the road, and the helicopter just doing somersaulting down and at high speed. It came to a halt about a couple of hundred yards from us, so we all rushed up there, and we were worried obviously about the thing bursting into flames, but we got the pilot and his passenger out, and the passenger had a broken leg and so on, but the pilot was unconscious, and the first thought that was actually a gunshot wound, but he certainly had a head wound, and so it had turned out subsequently, in fact, his rotor blade had clipped a pole along the side of the road, and that's not good for a helicopter. And he went in, and so I decided to take him to there's a neurosurgery facility in Saigon. So we got the chopper in to take him to Saigon, and he survived. He was back in the air in about 12 months. This is actually about a week after his 21st birthday, so he's a very lucky fellow. And he again is another of these chaps who wrote to me to say thank you for saving his life, but I didn't save his life at all. I just nursed him, an unconscious patient, for a half-hour flight to Saigon, and I'm very glad he survived.
I mean, you sound very, very modest about your contribution to that.
No, but I recognise that saving a life, it means you intervene in some way. Like, for example, if somebody has blocked the airway, for example, you fish that out, or they're bleeding to death, and you stop the bleeding and organise a transfusion. So it was nothing like that. It was just, here's a guy with a head wound, unconscious. Probably I saved his life and say, okay, he should go to Saigon rather than going to the normal evacuation route, which is down to Vung Tau. But so I just dropped him off there and in competent hands, and was back to battalion. Funny, no, back to Vung Tau for a shower, back to the battalion, all in the space of drama and all over in a couple of hours. Very weird war. So doctors from all the wars would have been amazed by this. It's so easy in a way.
To be in and out. Or...
Yeah. Well, to have something, a potentially usual thing, back to a first-class facility, which is what they did have in Saigon. Then myself, back to Vung Tau, was I able to have a shower and change of clothing, and then back to the battalion by sunset, all in one afternoon.
Does that offer a sense of unreality or surrealism to the whole experience?
Yeah, well, see, one of my the best things I did joining the army was to read Catch-22, which is, I don't know if you're familiar, but it was the most wonderful war book I've read, of which perfectly captures what a weird world it is. Side by side, great human drama, great tragedy, and black humour, and all squashed together, and sometimes all at the one time. And I found that book actually was a huge stroke of luck to have read that before I went to Vietnam, because just put me in the right frame of mind. Otherwise, you could easily be shattered by some of the things that happen. When you realise this is part of the absurd human story that we're all involved in, then you can much better take it in your stride. So I didn't like it, but you knew that people have been through far worse things than this, and this just happened to be today's ration. This is today's weird event.
I mean,
I could have been on that helicopter and as well, and sort of 5 minutes later, we'd done the same.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, in those moments when if you are stopping and thinking of the fact that people are going through much worse, or have been through much worse, who are you actually thinking about?
Well, I think I've just read some of the poems from World War One, and I mean, that was just horrendous beyond belief. I mean, they had none of the creature comforts we had. They went on forever. The slaughter was unimaginable. We had a lot of things to make life comfortable. Sometimes out on some of those operations, for example, a chopper would come in and offload a whole lot of cartons of cold milk and sandwiches and some fruit and so on. This would be unthinkable in all the wars. And just having that luxury of casualty management, that was a huge morale booster for the troops. To see a dust off chopper rolling in, that immediately put minds at rest. And luxuries they never had before. In the old days, you'd be carted off by stretcher bearers. You'd be on the road maybe for 6 hours or something until you got to a facility, bumping along. Terrible. So if you're going to have a war, that it was not a bad war. I mean, it's a very tense time because it was non-stop. You're always just a little bit. Well, there's no time where you were not a possibility of something happening. There's no front line, therefore no rear line.
Yeah. Now the mine incident that you showed us photographs of at the beginning of the day. I mean, that was one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, mine incident.
That's the biggest single incident. Yeah.
Now you were a part of that in a big way. So can you kind of walk us through that day?
Well, that was undoubtedly the most terrible day of my life, really. And here we had this towards the end of the tour, February, and we were a little battalion operation to head up towards what's called the Long High Hills, and this was a Viet Cong stronghold from way back, from French times, had given them trouble. And so we had one we were mounted up on armoured personnel carriers. The B company went on ahead. We were to follow just behind them, and we were just sort of packing up ourselves to follow them, and then we hear this sort of huge explosion, and just looking up and see this big mushroom cloud rising, and what the hell's going on? And then about 4 minutes later, another explosion and a mushroom, and so then garbled report of casualties, and so there was a chopper, one of those little reconnaissance choppers, right with us actually at the time. So I hopped into that and dropped into that, and there was this scene of absolute, unimaginable horror. Really, it was just terrible. It ended up anyway. The bottom line, we had 26 wounded and 6 killed, and A couple died subsequently, died of their wounds. And all the medics had been wounded, the whole lot. So the Corporal Medical Corps, or stretcher bearers, one of the stretcher bearers killed. So the wounded medics had, they're trying to sort of do their best, but they're obviously totally stunned by this. One of the medics, he's still haunted by the fact that he was told not to move because we're obviously stalled in a minefield. And what had happened is that the lead APC had been blown up by a big mine, which turned out was actually a recycled US naval shell, 5-inch shell. And the area had been seeded with jumping jack anti-personnel mines, and they're particularly mean beasts. They're ones which, when you tread on them, the charge detonates them. They spring up to about head height and then explode with great force. And so, when the first mine went up, the officer commanding and his offsiders went forward to see what the hell's going on and help. And one of that party detonated the jumping jack, and that actually caused the majority of the casualties. So when I arrived at the scene, there was the officer commanding, Major Bruce McWalder. He was sitting up, semi-conscious, unable to get up, with a head wound, and right beside him was the platoon commander, Jack Carruthers. Also the head wound, he was stretched out of the ground. And then just these 26 other wounded. And here, this is obviously was sitting in a minefield, so that didn't sort of make you feel any more comfortable. And you realize this is where the one time in my life I felt absolutely overwhelmed, by impotent as to how do you proceed? How do you get around this pile of badly injured people and help some and organise them to get out? So anyway, in the meantime, the dust-offs called, and so I just potted around and the dressing wounds. There was just this great. I was conscious of this great fear that I set off a mine myself and just joined the rest of them there. So that was frightful. In fact, one of the diggers there is convinced that he told me that if I moved, he'd shoot me. So I have no recollection of that, but he's quite convinced of that. And after about, so I just did my best then with what I had in the way of dressings and so on to stop bleeding, make people comfortable, and while waiting for, first of all, the sappers to move in with their mine detectors, and they were in within about half an hour, and then they moved through this area and laid white tape where it's safe to walk on, and shortly after that the first helicopters arrived and we were able to start shipping people out. And this is where probably is a doctor does earn his living, that just prioritising the injured. Who needs the most urgent, they go on board first. And so it had that more or less worked out by the time the choppers arrived. And so out go the badly wounded, then the lesser wounded, and finally the dead. And there's some just terrible scenes there. So it's one of those things where a whole bunch of this B company, they got most terribly mauled, not only then but also subsequently as well. So this coping with one or two casualties was bad enough. It's such a huge number, and you do feel just hopelessly inadequate, really.
I mean, feel free to not answer this, but can you give us a bit of a visual of, I guess, the extent of injuries that people suffer in that kind of mine blast, and I guess with the
the force of those mines is just unbelievable, really. I mean, there's one guy who was just cut in half. There's a pair of legs, and the torso was sitting 10 yards away. Up in a branch on a tree, there's an Australian Army boot, and that's okay. But within that, there's still an Australian Army leg, and then that sort of image would sort of haunt some of these guys, forever. And the lead APC had been thrown up in the air, was over on its side, and underneath it was you could see the arm of one of the digs protruding, still holding his rifle. And, so there was the maiming capacity was just spectacular. So some of those wounded had fairly mild wounds, but the bad ones were just beyond belief. And everybody, of course, utterly sort of mentally shocked. I mean, the percussion alone would be enough to sort of. It blew the back door off an armoured personnel carrier, and there were diggers sitting inside it, and they were blown out. Miraculously, only one of them was killed. Both the driver and the commander of the personnel carrier were killed instantly. And then of the wounded, both Major McQualter and Lieutenant Jack Rose, they died over the next next week or two in hospital of the head wounds. So that was undoubtedly. I mean, I just could not handle that event for really. It really took me a couple of years to settle down from that. And I'm sure that some of the digs just have not got over that at all.
I mean, the sight must be absolutely horrendous, but I imagine the sounds of that kind of scene must equally be.
Well, it's very distressing, terribly distressing. And I mean, going up to the back of this APC that had been blown over. At first, I thought it was just a pile of discarded equipment. But in fact, they were the diggers, and dead amongst the alive. They're all piled together, and all blackened by the explosion. It is very hard to work out where the hell to start. Where the hell, who needs first up, and but here mercifully, the whole thing was over really from go to woe in couple of hours, you see. So it wasn't, you knew this terrible thing's going to come to an end. You're going to just do the best job you can. But see, by that stage, this is late in the tour. So as we're getting down towards the end of the tour, I'd seen enough to know that there are limits to what you can achieve. Even if you had the world's top neurosurgeon and vascular surgeon there sitting beside you out in the field. They weren't going to achieve any more than you could achieve with a backpack full of shell dressings, and so I don't feel I really saved a life, but I don't think I stuffed up either. So I think I just did the best with what I had in the situation, which is what I'm giving a talk about this actually to the Army medics in a few weeks' time, and I'll just point that very thing out, that there's some situations where you're not going to do much except you do the best you can with what you got. And I still. I mean, that's now 37 years on. I mean, it's still. I do get quite emotional about it. It's because it just stays with you for keeps.
Well, it's hard to imagine not being affected by something like that. Really,
you'd have to be weird not to, for sure. And that's why I don't feel harsh about, say, diggers who are psychological wrecks as a result of that. Because that, I mean, these things do. It's like your soul is ploughed and leaves a furrow, and that made me enough to cripple you. On the other hand, in my case, I think it's actually made me stronger, because you feel okay. You've seen the worst the world's got to offer. Well, probably exaggerating, but you've seen something really terrible, and you've survived it, and you sort of got back on the horse again, and away you go. So that's all you can do in life, is just to do the best job you can at the time with what you got.
And you're dealing with people that you know.
That's right. By the time I knew, I mean, it certainly the officers you get to know very well, because you know, sort of meet them in the mess and so on, but most of those diggers, I mean, say the stretcher bearer who was killed, he's a young fellow called Mick Poole. It was only 2 weeks after his 20th birthday. He was you know, always a favourite with the kids in the village and so on, and yeah, it's just horrifying to see him there dead. And the corporal medic, Ron Nichols, I mean, he's a very fine fellow. He'd had lots of rough encounters all his whole year, you know, with bad wounds, and you just feel that he'd had enough. He'd had enough, and in fact, I think everybody had enough by then. Everybody's well and truly ready to go home. And the terrible thing about that particular platoon, they got a new platoon commander, so they lost the platoon commander, got a new one, and a month later he was killed himself on a mine. So right in front of all these digs who just survived his last thing. So it was the mine story is the most, I think, one of the most horrendous things in that Vietnam War, and the fact that a lot of them are our own mines, just getting recycled, would sort of make the whole thing less bearable. Very tense walking around a minefield. It's because you're torn between your instinct says, look, just sit down and wait for the mine, you know, the mine clearance to happen. But you can't do that when you've got, you know, in an area about the size of a couple of tennis courts, you've got 26 people who are wounded and who need help. And
to call in for it, I imagine.
Calling for it, yeah. I mean, I must have been very good. I mean, there's no hysteria, no great fuss, but you know, you knew it was very bad.
And so you actually lost some of your medical team.
Well, lost the stretcher bearer, but all the one company medic, medical corps, he was wounded, and all the stretcher bearers, all four of them were wounded. The one killed. So the digs were left high and dry without any medical care, in other words. And not good.
Now I guess you would have mentioned it, or the media, the articles would have talked about it, but obviously it didn't attract the VC from their hotspot.
Well, this is what we're worried about. So we're all stuck there where we get mortared. You know, so you're a beautiful target. You got, but no, it didn't happen. That night, they certainly saw lights moving down the hill, and they had airstrikes on it and whatnot. But no, so everybody just packed up the following day and went back, called off the operation. And it wasn't called off because of that mine incident. It's called off because there was a threat of an attack on the Nui Dat base. So it is sort of all hands on deck back at the base at that stage. But I think everybody's very glad to say goodbye to the long high hills. And because there were subsequent years, there were more mine incidents galore in that area. And a lot of the mines were actually retrieved from mines laid by the Australians.
That's really got to hurt.
Which is hurts, yeah. And then the Vietnamese is very smart, and they lifted the mines, put them down where they wanted them.
Yeah, I even heard stories of certain mines that are almost like forward activating, that they would actually get in there and turn them around.
Yeah, the Claymore, that's right, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just this bad business.
They're very, very astute adversary.
Now, This question has sort of come to me over the last few weeks, I guess, and it's about dealing with serious wounded, and I guess just that notion of, you know, what's been hitting the media of recent years, euthanasia, just in terms of, I mean, you're in extreme circumstances a lot of the time, and I mean, is that ever a case
for
that's
euthanasia of?
Well, yeah, of seriously wounded or people that just can't be helped in certain situations, that are too far gone because of their injuries.
Tempted to put them out of their misery, you mean?
Yeah.
I never contemplated myself, but I know. I think it happened. Here, I'm only relying on anecdote with some Vietnamese wounded, that they were wounded very badly, and that they might have been. But this is obviously highly controversial, and it's only hearsay. But I would not be surprised, if I instructed our medics to treat the enemy wounded exactly like ours. In fact, they got evacuated on helicopters. They shared the same ward in the hospital, Australian hospital, with digs, and it was actually quite touching seeing them learning all the bad language from the diggers as they're convalescing. But no, I would never countenance that. People can be salvageable. Quadriplegics, live to be grateful that they're still alive. I mean, some might curse their state and not want to be alive, but at least they've got a choice, haven't they? But you would never dream of making that decision out in the field. But I can imagine somebody being too horrified by what lays before them. Is this person really alive or not?
Yeah, that was something I've been curious about.
Yeah, it's because some of the wounds were just frightful. I know you've probably seen photographs, but people losing both limbs. That ain't no life.
Were there ever patients who would, be challenging the treatment that they would get? Obviously, they've got a serious limb injury.
Oh, let me go. Sorry.
Let me go. Or protesting treatment because they want to keep their limbs. And things like that.
I tell you what, the Australian hospital had a reputation of being conservative with limbs. The American hospital had a reputation for being a bit gung-ho and removing them. Now, whether there's any basis to that or not, I don't know. But I know one dig who managed to persuade the pilot to take him to the Australian chopper pad instead of the US. That's what he reckoned anyway, because he thought he was going to lose a leg under the American care. So here again, I think, soldiers love yarns, don't they? And a lot of these rumours, they start, and whether there's any truth in it or not, I don't know. But that was the reputation of the Americans, they're a bit gung-ho. Whereas Australians would fight harder to conserve a limb.
Now, would something of the truth be in that, because obviously saving a limb was a much longer ordeal and operation?
Yeah. And I guess, you see, if you're faced with multiple casualties, queuing up outside the operating theatre, some going to die, that would put pressure on you to take the shortcut, and that may mean the shortcut of somebody's leg. So, that's a choice I never had to make, but it may well have happened. Mm-hmm. It certainly happened. I think it's in other theatres, when there's more wholesale carnage, people would remove a limb to save a life, which is perfectly legitimate, and you'd be more likely to do so if you knew there's 3 other guys queuing up for a life-saving procedure.
Mm. And what about humour or black humour? Australians seem to be fairly infamous for it.
There's a story where people line up for the photograph before they went on the operation and say, let's get a shot of you while you still got both your legs. So there's plenty of that. Yeah. And I can't think of any other good examples, but Yeah, it's talking about, you won't be dancing, mate, when you get home. You won't have any legs, that sort of stuff. So that went on a lot, for sure.
It was a good tension release.
Yep. So in other words, it introduced a note of unreality, so a bit of the she'll be right.
Yeah. Now you mentioned earlier, Tony, that about, in all your modesty, you believe there was one life that you did save. I think you referenced an incident. So I was just wondering if you could tell me about that.
Well, probably that chopper pilot. Maybe. So it's quite a long flight. It was a half-an-hour flight. Unconscious patient, and just attention to airway and good posture and so on. But that's something that any first aid certificate can do. You see, so it wasn't big doctor skills there.
But I guess at the time you're the one who's tending to him.
Oh
so.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, but I wasn't flashing any great skills. I was just looking after the way anyone trained in first aid would do it to get him so he's good airway, breathing, because he was unconscious the whole time. And it's actually it's very hard to nurse somebody on a helicopter. They are so noisy and vibrating, and got absolutely no idea what they're doing in the way of pulse rates and so on.
So how do you manage?
Just get them over on the side, head back, tongue forward.
And just make sure that it's
stay there. Yeah.
That it stays in that position.
Yeah. On the floor. I mean, it's just an ordinary chopper. Wasn't a dust-off chopper. So a lot of our casualties are evacuated on ordinary helicopter. If there's one available, there's just another taxi to get the person out of the battlefield into the hospital. The dust-off choppers are good because they had medics on board. They had intravenous gear already sort of ready to go, so you could actually whack up a drip if you had somebody who was obviously shocked from loss of blood. And those medics they were quite skilled. I mean, this is the time fishing people out of the battlefield and getting them in as good condition as possible to the hospital, shorter time.
And again, this may sort of sound a bit like an obvious question, but what was the sort of feeling generally amongst the troops about, obviously, dust-off crews and pilots? And
I think they probably worshipped them, yeah? Gosh. Because they were fair game targets, yeah? The Viet Cong shot at them. They had a nice big fat red cross on each door and the nose and on the belly, which is supposed to protect them, but they were targets. Some of them got shot down. And they would go in. The Yanks were very good, actually. The Air Force choppers, they came in for a fair bit of criticism at the start of our involvement there, because they'd been told to be very careful with equipment, and so they would tend to stick to the rules a lot, whereas the Americans, they would just crash into any old landing site and do the needful. Whereas I think the Australians, later on, they became very good. The Aussies were good. But the Yank dust-off, because that was an American division entirely, they were terrific. They would have a shot at anything, and they were just, it gladdened my heart to see them roll in and say, oh, over to you, mate. Yeah. And they're going to be in good care, and they're going to be on operating tables shortly, and huge relief.
Do you think over time the Australians kind of picked up tips and training from the American pilots?
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah, for sure. Well, because it did actually become. I think it's sort of there's a lot of ill feeling at first, and that sort of rose up through the ranks, and it had to be sorted out at top level. To say, look, come on, guys, throw your standing orders overboard. That this is a war after all, and you're not working under peacetime rules about where you cannot fly, where it's safe, where you may risk your chopper. An expensive item for sure, but then this might save a life.
Yeah, right. Had the pleasure of speaking to at least one chopper pilot from Vietnam, and he extraordinary tales of hot-spot landings.
Yeah, they did. Eventually, they would, you see them hunting around, see if there's a log there. They might put a get down the wrong spot and wreck the plane. I mean, they managed to wreck only one chopper as far as I know on operation, but they would eventually just drop it anywhere pretty well. It was just wonderful. Because they need to have a bit of a run out of a lot of those areas are a lot of trees and scrub and so on, and you get your chopper blades caught on those, you're down as well.
Now, would the VC kind of take the opportunity to target the dust-off crews, as they're landing to pick up wounded and stuff like that on a regular basis?
I've never heard of them. No, I think they were regarded as fair game, but I never had any first-hand experience of one being shot at or shot down. But he did hear they were not. The Red Cross didn't make them immune. In other words, they were unarmed. They didn't carry machine guns at all.
Yeah, I find that amazing.
Yeah, that's why we didn't. See, the medics didn't wear Red Cross. You notice in Iraq now that the troops are wearing a Red Cross on the armband. They didn't do it in Vietnam because it'd probably make you a good target.
It's the Red Cross.
Yeah.
So what? But you wore something that designated you as a doctor?
No. I was just in my jungle greens and same as it.
So to a VC off in the distance, you just were an unarmed soldier or a soldier with a pistol on your hip?
Yeah. Officer as well.
Officer.
You'll see the pips on the shoulder. They weren't shiny pips, they're cloth, so they're not that easy to see, but no, a Red Cross would be, stand out a mile, and it certainly wouldn't give you immunity.
Yeah, but I mean, was it ever a thought in your mind that, I mean, here you are, you're identifying yourself as an officer and all you have is a pistol, and the VC wouldn't know that you're a doctor or a medic? No,
you'd be fair game, that's right. But on balance, I thought that it would be unwise. I mean, I don't think anybody put their hands up and asked for their Red Cross. No. Well, if they're shooting down choppers of the Red Cross, then that's a pretty good hint. Don't go that way.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Red and white stands out a lot more.
Yes, on the jungle green, it's quite eye-catching. Yeah.
You mentioned to Michelle earlier that when you went into Vietnam, you kind of have that very bold sense of immortality, and that's it. But you kind of lost it after a time. Was there kind of a key moment or something that happened?
I think it's just a gradual attrition. I believe that you have a finite amount of courage issued to you, and even the most courageous bloke, you hammer him enough, he'll run out of puff. And I could certainly feel myself running out of puff. I was more inclined to ride inside an APC than on top of it, towards the end. Early on you sort of get up, sit on top so you get some fresh air and see what's going on. Later on I'll be very happy just to huddle down inside when you travel anywhere. And when I was going on some of those village clinics towards the end, I was wearing a flak jacket and a helmet and on the road trip up and back. And whereas before, just another jaunt around the countryside. So I think it just very, very gradually you realise, come on, you're not immortal after all, damn it. But I didn't feel bad about it, because it does actually make sense. I mean, it's, in a way, it's sort of false heroics to sort of expose yourself needlessly.
Well, particularly in a country where there's bullets left, right,
yeah.
I was just wondering if you could talk in a bit more detail about the 1 month that you spent with the other medical team at the hospital in, what was that, Vung Tau?
In Vung Tau, yeah.
Just describe the hospital and the staff and so forth.
Well, the hospital at that stage was pretty well set up as in these Kingstrand huts, the aluminium huts with glass louver windows, open and airy. Some parts were air conditioned, I think an intensive care unit and maybe a fever ward, something like that. And I was actually sort of quasi-patient myself because I was quite sick, but I was running helping out with the medical ward. It was just the general the malarias and fevers and chest infections, that sort of stuff. And noticed it's nice and slack, and got down to the beach a lot. Had a few good meals in town. There was some relics of French cuisine of those days from the old colonial era, and it was really it really was a holiday. Actually, it was very non-stressed, but my heart really wasn't there. I felt, as I mentioned earlier, I felt that I belonged back in the battalion because I had a great sense of belonging, and I couldn't wait to get back. And I felt the docs there, they were very competent and so on, but I just was not happy there. I wanted to be back in the bush.
But could you just describe the hospital a bit more? Like how many beds there were, how many staff and so forth?
Yeah, I'll be very hasty on that. I think something like 100 beds. At that stage, I think the nursing staff were just, there were nurses there for sure. No, really I'd be totally inventing the structure of the hospital. It was a couple of surgeons, and I really know I can't really sort of go into that.
Were you rostered on for a specific amount of time?
I think I was just doing a sort of 9 to 5 on in the medical ward, which is just general medicine, sick diggers.
Were any of the men in the ward from your battalion?
Not that I remember. No, I don't think so. Yeah. Not much help there, am I? So it's no, I've got a very hazy recollection of that chapter. Maybe I just blocked it out. I just felt it was a bit of a waste of time. In other words, I didn't get my teeth in it. I mean, in retrospect, what I should have done is sort of say, "Whoopee, there's a great opportunity to look at military medicine from a hospital perspective." But I just goofed. I think I was just mentally probably tired and goofed off.
I'm sure you were quite exhausted after.
So it's like a second R&R, but not as comfortable. Yeah.
And what about?
Because the accommodation's just in tents, on the sand. I don't think you had floorboards or anything.
Did you have your own accommodation, or you had to share?
I think it was shared. Probably would have been shared for sure. Yeah.
What was the beach like at Vung Tau?
Not bad. Surf was a bit flat. A few stingers. But no, it's very hot though. You see, that is much hotter. It's hotter than Surfer's Paradise, and some is bad enough. This is worse. In fact, the diggers call it Sufferer's Paradise. The diggers' way, they always dream up a name for things. So early in the morning, fine, but you wouldn't want to go in the middle of the day.
Was it clean?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, it's facing the South China Sea, so it's well away from the town. It was okay. Yeah.
And was the Badco Club in Vung Tau?
No, that hadn't started. That came on about a year later, I think.
So was there any unofficial sort of Aussie watering hole in Vung Tau?
No, there was the Pacific Hotel. That was probably the main. I remember going to watch a striptease performed by two Filipino ladies. The only music they had was Jingle Bells. That was another bit of good catch-22 absurdity. That's ridiculous. But the Pacific Hotel, and I say a couple of quite good restaurants there. He felt reasonably safe in Vung Tau. It was pretty secure.
What sort of feeling did you get when you were walking through the streets, from the Vietnamese people? Was it? Because it would have been a strange town, because there could have been anyone there, really.
Yep. Yeah. They. I think generally the feeling was hostile. I don't think. They were very pally for commercial transactions. barber shops and so on, and the bars. But you know, I really don't think they liked having the Aussies there. I'm sure there were great individual friendships sprung up, you know, with some of the sort of the civil aid stuff that went down well. But you got the feeling, say, certainly in the villages out in the countryside, that they were not happy about the whole thing. Couldn't wait for us to shoot through.
What were your own feelings on, you know, how the war was progressing, and you know, I mean, what did you feel about it while you were there, and did that change when you came home?
We were there early on when it was still very positive, and the Australian population as a whole was very positive. We were there doing a great job with saving them from communism, and in turn protecting the rest of Southeast Asia and in the long term ourselves. And people did really believe this domino theory. You stop them up there, and you know, there's certainly plenty of refugees from the north to a couple of those Catholic villages I mentioned. They were very great for us, and we had a great rapport with them.
Did you feel like you were winning though? I mean, did it feel like it was worth what
we were.
The loss
in our
was?
year we were winning. The map before we went was entirely, it was a Viet Cong province. It had been for 17 years or something, and since the French left. And by the time, at the end of our year, it was all pretty well, the whole province was under some sort of control. I mean, it's not secure, but it was, you know, there was some semblance of local government returning, and so we felt, yes, we left it in a better condition when we arrived.
So that must have been good for morale to feel like you were winning.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And then, mine, of course, subsequently, it all turned out to be a total failure. We lost thoroughly, and you know, the bottom line, from my point of view, is a total waste of time. Terrible. I mean, other people argue that we halted communism for a while and gave the other countries chances to get ahead, but you know, think all those lives, 500 Aussie lives, for what?
Did you? But you didn't feel that at the time?
No. Oh no, I was
even
I was
the
keen.
losses, even though you'd sort of seen
the price you pay, for sure.
Most people felt like that.
Yeah. Most of the diggers thought we're you know, this is a great thing. You know, I can't remember any of the digs saying that you know, it's atrocious us being in the country, you know, with. I mean, we got occasional feeling for it. Sometimes you see on some of these road holding operations that open a highway to let the civilian traffic move through for a while, and you'd see sometimes these Mercedes full of obviously very well-off Vietnamese sail through, and you think, hell, you know, what, you know, are we really on the right side here? But overall, I think most people thought we're doing the right thing in our year. 2 years later, a different thing altogether. We're clearly losing. And we got a lot of support from home. I mean, we had heroic sort of marches through town before embarkation. The battalion marched through, great reception, and again when he came home, ditto, fantastic. And the protest movement was just getting going, but it was not that prominent.
You would have been in Vietnam for Christmas, wouldn't you?
Yep.
How did you celebrate Christmas?
Well, the Army has this wonderful institution whereby the officers serve Christmas dinner to the digs, and so we serve them Christmas dinner. And in fact, we did a round early in the morning. We were back in the base at the time. We did a rum round in the morning, around the tents, dispensing rum to the diggers. And then at lunchtime, we had this big slap-up. I'll show you the menu if you like. The slap-up lunch for them and served by the officers, which is a nice tradition, really. And they all sort of ribbed us like fury and demanded better service and just drinks. And in fact, there was a truce. There was a Christmas truce declared, which was honoured.
So this was New Dat, was it?
Yeah.
Where Christmas was?
Yeah.
So just for the archive, can you just describe the menu, what it was on the menu?
I've got it on my scrapbook, if you want me to get that.
I mean, just generally.
Was
it a traditional roast, or what was it?
Hell, I don't remember. No, it was good army tucker with some fancy labels put on the menu. I think that's what it was, and many courses, and I think pretty liberal supply of beer, and sit down lunch. Yeah.
What about mail at Christmas time? Did people get
the mail,
presents from home? And
yes.
Like
The mail was very good, really. I think it's something like about a 4 or 5 day from Australia to Vietnam, out in the bush there, and I got plenty of letters. I had all my medical journals forwarded up there. We had fruitcakes were the big thing, and if you ended up with a 16 by 6 tent full of fruitcakes with nobody to eat, the Vietnamese refused to eat them. I eventually had things like smoked oysters and anchovies sent up, and so that we were very well looked after, from home. And digs who didn't have any particular attachment, I think digs are pretty generous. They'd share things around all the time. I used to take some of my smoked oysters out to the bush and tell the digs this is what the new officers' rations is, just to pull their legs. But we had, and then towards the end of the trip, we were living quite comfortably. We had tents with floorboards down and beds. In the medical centre we had electricity through the place, and I bought a whacking great tape recorder. You could borrow tapes from the US library in Vung Tau, and so had a little musical soirees back in the base. They even had a movie theatre going with an outdoor screen.
So did you have much of a handover to the person coming?
Yeah. I had a chap called Tony Williams, who subsequently became a psychiatrist, and we swapped notes like fury for sure, and which is, I'm sure, helpful to him because by that time it was an established camp, an established medical centre, nice gleaming hut, and so on, and we knew the sort of disease pattern, what sort of drugs you need to take out bush, all that sort of stuff. So that was good.
Okay, and so coming home, you came back on
Sydney,
HMAS Sydney.
Yep.
What was that trip like? How long at sea?
12 days, 10 days or 12 days, and that was lovely because that was really. It'd be a terrible cold turkey to fly out of Saigon into Sydney because May cold and so on, and just your brain was sort of this way you could sort of get yourself more civilized. It was still quite hard work on the way back because as a doctor, you had a few sort of medical problems still with a boatload of diggers. So I still had quite good sick rates, but.
And would the Navy doctors help as well?
No, they wouldn't have you in the army.
No, so they look after their
yeah, sure, yeah. And a few anxious blokes with their socially acquired diseases, and so that there was a bit of that. But it was just wonderful to just be out at sea, sun, out in the open sea, glorious, very relaxing.
And you sailed into Sydney, did you?
Yes, that was a very emotional thing. You sail in at dawn, beautiful autumn morning city, and had all the diggers was all lined up on the side into Garden Island. The families all waiting there, and it's fantastic. So we're all down the gangplank, and it's all on for young and old, and then we formed up and marched through Sydney, lunchtime crowd, and huge reception. I got a special cheerio whistling past Sydney Hospital. We marched straight past there, and that was wonderful. And then back home, all broke up and cheerio. So that was that was very, very emotional thing. Just that.
Can you describe the crowds? I mean, were they quite big?
Well, on that article I saw, there's 100,000 people they quote. I don't know how they judge these things, but there was ticker tape, and it was very, very enthusiastic, very warm. And as he swung down past the Woolloomooloo pub, this guy was just staying out there with a whole tray full of schooners, handing them out to the diggers just as they marched past, and they swig them down and put the glass down and 100 yards on. And so it was. I think we were a very lucky battalion to go at the time. If you're going to go to a war, go when it's a popular war, and you're sort of vaguely winning. The ones I feel sorry for are the latter ones, where it was deeply unpopular, and obviously, the whole carnival was being shut down, and it was winding down. And what are you there for? We really had a sense of purpose that we were actually helping these poor buggers, defending them against communism, liberating them. I think people really believed it, and that made it an awful lot easier.
Just when people, are killed or injured and have to go home, and replacements need to come in, does that come from with other sections in the battalion, or is it new people coming into the battalion? And do those people, if they haven't done their 12 months, obviously, do they get shifted to another battalion? Yeah. So,
I think there's some limit. I think if they've been something like 9 months, some long period, then they'd come back with the battalion. But they were the ones hard for, you're right. So they had a thing called the reinforcement unit, Australian reinforcement unit. So diggers would be set up and they would be held in that unit at Nui Dat until there's a slot from the battalion to replace somebody who's going home. And that had been hard for them. I always felt sorry for them because, it's like the new Joe on the block, you sort of, the other guys would size him up, and he'd have to work hard to fit in with them, and that must have been some difficult cases there. But we had I think about 200 of the 800 came home early and were replaced. It's quite a number, quarter.
And do you know the statistics for lives lost within the battalion?
Yeah, well, we had 100 total casualties, and 25 of those are killed. So, including 5 officers. So it was, by low figures, but by sort of classical trench warfare style, where they wipe out whole battalions. But it's just that niggly. It was a terribly frustrating war because something like a minefield, you're passive, absolutely nothing to do except just suffer and get on there. There's no enemy to charge, no over the top and atom stuff, and snipers, ambushes, just tense, brief, inconclusive, often very hard. So I think for mentally it's a very hard war for the digs. And if they happen to be in one of the later battalions where it is also unpopular, where you get kicked at both ends.
So just coming back to Australia, what were the things that you noticed, I guess, that maybe you didn't always appreciate before, or that you were really happy to see again?
It's clean. So the Vang Tau was, the public hygiene is not a strong point there, still isn't. It was utterly safe. And I remember just floating down that first day, after we got back, and it's like being 2 feet above the ground. I was just positively euphoric, absolutely euphoric. And a glorious feeling. But you see that you've got, it is like recovering from some sort of mental illness. There's a huge gap between what's in your head and what's in the head of those around you, and that was really unbridgeable. You see, and I know with my own family, my mother and sisters, as my mother told my sisters, they said I was like a bear with a sore head. You see, so and I was doing my best, to be the right guy, but I was not the same guy. Sort of 12 months on, probably about 10 years older, and it was very hard. And people ask you, say, well, what is it like there? And you say, well, you either go two ways. You either sort of say, well, it was great, we got big into the rape, loot and pillage, sort of another totally flippant answer, or you dive into, okay, do you want to really hear this bad story? So it's very hard to pitch, to transmit your experience to other people. And I've found it the best way to do it, just more recently, is just to write it down. That's therapeutic as well.
In hindsight, were you happy that you weren't coming back to a wife and kids that you needed to negotiate all that with?
See, the marriedies were the ones I felt sorry for. So for a bachelor, you're a free spirit, but for the married, huge. And I know a lot of marriages bust up after that. And you felt so sorry for say, the dads there missing out on their kids, a year of their young lives. And I felt even more sorry, actually, in a way. I think it's even tougher for the wives. They're holding the fort back home, getting none of the glory, all of the work. And yeah, that was very hard for those. Hard for the married ones.
Especially, I guess, for the national servicemen who were, bank clerks and so forth.
Yep.
I mean, coming back and trying to fit back into that old job when you've been somewhere completely different.
Well, my little Batman, he was a carpet layer from Melbourne. He got married only 2 weeks before he left, in fact. And so he came back home, and I couldn't wait to get back to Australia, back to his mates and so on. I got this plaintive letter from him about a year later, he was missing it. And then another year went on, and he actually rejoined the army. And he actually rose up to be a captain in the medical corps, on the administrative side. And no, he's a different bloke, right? But his marriage survived, and he's back into it.
And in a way, you must have been a bit the same, because, you hadn't been in the army for years and years. You'd had 6 days and then off to Vietnam.
Yeah.
You were very much a civilian yourself.
Sure, yeah.
Was it hard for you to contemplate going... I know you still had a bit of army time to serve, but to contemplate going back to civilian life? Or, did you ever think, maybe I should just stay in the army for long term?
There's no career at that stage. I think the career opportunity is probably better now, but you see, it's in the Brit Army you could specialise, and here you just be a general dog's body forever. And so looking ahead is you jump early or not at all. So I was not at all tempted. But I kept up my links with the army as a consultant dermatologist then for many years, and but it is a young man's game anyway. It's only a chapter of your life. You've had it by the time you're 50.
So how much time off did you get before you had to report back to duty?
57 days. That was bliss. And so I just charged off around the countryside, went down to visiting friends and relatives around the country, and Victoria and Tasmania, and just had a good bludge. And I just great. It really, Vietnam totally occupied my mind for 12 months. I think it was, everything else was peripheral. It is extraordinary. I just could not get the stuff out of my mind for where it's totally dominating every moment of every day for about a year, and then it just sort of slowly faded out. Just got taken over by the real present world.
Was there any specific thing that clicked for you that made you be able to move on, or?
Yes, I think finding a wonderful woman and getting married, that's probably as therapeutic as anything, for sure. So I think getting out to into the country post, Wagga. Country towns are quite therapeutic, just down on the banks of the Murrumbidgee there, and just a bit of standard, normal, non-hectic. I think if I'd sort of dived into hospital existence in the Metropolitan Hospital, I would have sunk, probably. whereas this was nice and low key, and so just gradually sort of that healing balm sort of got going and settled back to normal.
So how and where did you meet your wife?
Well, it's the old corny doctor-nurse story. She's a trainee nurse at Wagga Base Hospital, and I used to the odd night and weekend moonlighting there as a doc, and met there, and so the Kapuka camp is only about 7 miles out of town, and so that was easy. And then we married, so it was about 18 months after I got back, and then we went off to live in Singapore for 2 years. Again, still with the army, attached to the British Military Hospital, and lived happily ever after.
That's great. So, post-Vietnam life in the army, was that satisfying?
No, I hated it. No, well, I didn't. No, Kapuka was. No, I just didn't have my heart in that at all. Actually, because, I mean, as I say, I was just my brain was too befuddled. I think I went through the action zone, and I used to look at these recruits coming in and saying, "What are you guys in for?" And they're all so eager-eyed and keen, and I know they're desperate to get off to a unit to go to Vietnam, and that sort of gave me a bit of heartache. But then getting off to Singapore, subsequently, that was totally different. I was sort of quasi-army. I mean, the Singapore life was very good and not that demanding. And I sort of learned a lot of tropical medicine there, which I needed before I went to Vietnam. So I think I'd probably completed my post-Vietnam cure by the end of Singapore.
With the recruits coming in, the new ones, I mean, were you ever tempted to fail someone's medical?
Say, look, you're
not going to be.
They had, you're talking about the psychological aspect?
Any aspect.
Or to sort of sabotage the war effort?
No, or just having been there and done it, and
feeling
seeing
sorry
these
for
eager kids that you just think you're just not going to.
No, I mean, this is life, isn't it? I mean, the old flow goes on. People rush off to wars and doing stupid things and base jumping and whatnot. I mean, it always will be, people who want to do that. And no, I just because I felt quite sentimentally, I really greatly admire these 20-year, these are 20-year-olds, these guys, the Nashos. The average age of the battalion was 20 or 21. In fact, there was about a 21st birthday every day there. We only got 400 of 20-year-olds there, and they put up with such a lot, in that good, easygoing Aussie style, and I'm just full of admiration for what they put up with. It is hard, it is long, it is tough, and. I think you see all those bad stories from Vietnam, they're American bad stories. You don't see Aussie bad stories like that.
Where were you when public opinion turned and people were starting to be anti the Vietnam War?
I'd been in Singapore. So I was well away from it then. So that is 68, 70, that sort of stage, yeah. So the Aussies were out by 72. And so it is peripheral then. I was Singapore, I was away from all the Australian public opinion. I was just aware that it was, sort of getting increasingly sour.
Well, when you first came back, were you still interested in watching the news and finding how the war was going, or did you just sort of?
Yeah, peripherally. Because I could sense that it is just going bad, and I think if you're on a losing side, that dampens your interest, and I'd sort of, well, hell, this is obviously going to end in tears, and we're not going to win, in other words. So I had no interest in it.
Was there a point where you became, I guess, when it was obvious that we were losing, that you became angry about, I guess, the losses that you'd seen and for what? Did you ever go through an angry
No,
phase?
I'm not angry. No, I regret it. I do regret it, but I think it's if you there was a reason for us going there. We really believe we're doing good, and the vast majority of people believe we're doing good. We're in World War II. Appeasement was a dirty word, and we're still, we didn't go in when we should have gone in there, and so people still had that feeling that you should go in where duty calls, even though it may be at a cost in others' lives. And this appeared to be our duty. And I know every now it's wise after the event you say, well, that is ridiculous. Let the Vietnamese sort out their own messy civil war and slaughter each other. What are we doing there? You say the same about Iraq. And so I don't feel angry about it. I do regret it, though, for sure.
I was talking to an infantryman the other day who was saying, just how hard it is to take a life, and how every time he's done that, a bit of you dies as well.
Yes.
What's it like from a doctor's point of view?
Well, I could understand shooting somebody I could not do. I'd be a hopeless soldier on the shooting end anyway. But from my point of view, this is just part of the panorama of human suffering. We just happen to be in this little wedge right then and there. And, it's stupid, pointless, but it's got to be done, you see. I don't feel in any way negative about it, except to say, well, it was a waste of time.
But with your job, it's a very positive contribution that you're making. So, you must feel...
Well, I'm very happy. If I help anybody, either mentally or physically, I'm very happy about that for sure. But the business of sort of saving lives, I've really got no time for that for the reasons I've explained. But it's one of those things. It's a chunk of life experience I would never want to have missed, but never want to do again. That's really in a nutshell.
Now, I'm kind of curious to talk about, I guess, PTSD and things like that. Have you, whether you'd call it PTSD or not, that's sort of beside the point, but years down the track, have you found that the Vietnam experience in some way has kind of stayed with you? And if it has, in what way?
See, it's a defined disorder now. It's actually been classified as a mental illness. It always has existed, obviously, in people who had any sort of shocking experience. And I think, and it means people whose mental lives are being disturbed by past horrible experiences. That's in a nutshell. And I've no doubt that this has happened to a lot of veterans of all types. But I think what's happened, the whole thing has slipped out of control. It's become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, I know this is a very tricky area because a lot of veterans would be frothing at the mouth at the very suggestion. But I think you can. It is actually, it can be a contagious disease. In other words, if you huddle with a lot of people and rehash interminably horrible past events, it can actually be depressing, and it can actually end up again dominating your consciousness, and it can become the main theme of your life. And I really believe that this has happened, and I'm not taking anything away at all from the fair dinkum ones whose mental lives have been wrecked or greatly impaired. But I think it has become a bit too popular diagnosis, and I think you can actually avoid it by not immersing yourself too long or too frequently in past misfortune. Everybody has past misfortune, women lose babies, terrible car smashes happen, and I know that term "move on" is a bit flippant, but I think somehow you have to package bad experiences up into, wall them off to some extent, so you can concentrate on the here and now, you know, and just enjoying your family, your friends, your food, and just the wonders of being alive. And some people are denying that themselves simply by dwelling too much on that past. And I'd be howled down by some Vietnam veterans for suggesting it. But I think that as time goes by, people will realize that in fact you can you can have some terrible experiences and wall them up and still access them, you know, as we are now, without poisoning your life.
I mean, I think it comes from probably analysing some of the sort of older veterans, or the, the ones that have lived to, early hundreds. So that, they came home, they didn't talk about it, they forgot it, got on with their lives, never dealt with it, and that perhaps that's actually a good thing.
Maybe good for them. But my theory is that you should. I'm documenting myself. I've written down my story, so because I deeply regret that I haven't access to my grandfather's stuff. You see, he left on a line. Here's a guy. He got a DSO. He's mentioned dispatches twice: Gallipoli and Palestine. He was second command of the 6th Light Horse, and not a jot. See, and I feel cheated. You see. And I think for say my grandchildren and so on, one of them is bound to sort of get an idle curiosity in times to come, and you just love them to, okay, at least have access to it. And I'd like to say we're going for a jaunt to Vietnam next year with some old vets. First time, and it'll be pushing 40 years, you know? And we're not going to mope. We're going to, we want to pay respect and revisit and just and acknowledge it and meet the opposition as well. That we've got contacts there with the Viet Cong, and I think it'll be phenomenal. And to wall that off forever, delete it from your CV. I think it's terrible. It's as bad as wallowing it too much. Yeah. So. Sometimes when I have been talking about it with some others, I can feel this sort of that I'm sort of sinking into going down a downward spiral and getting very gloomy, depressed about it, and so I just call it quits then. You see, but it's good to be able to visit. I think it's terrific.
I think my last question for you is because we've kind of talked a lot about logistics and sort of doom and gloom. I'm wondering. Yeah. On the other side of the fence, in the extreme, are there any kind of key images or things that you brought back from your Vietnam experience that are quite light, or something quite comic that?
Well, I think it was one of how when we were down on the beach before we took off for the bush, they just have the outdoor shower. It's one shower, and all showering is supposed to be done before 6 p.m. And it is just out in total open. There's no covering around Hessian, just a shower. And at 6 p.m. the bugle would sound the last post, and at that stage all showering is supposed to be done, and people sort of. Getting on what they're supposed to be doing, stand to attention, facing the flag, good military stuff. Anyway, this guy was still showering at 6 p.m. So on the bugle, he snapped to attention with the water streaming down over him until the last bugle had noted faded. That's good catch-22 stuff. But there were lots of pleasant moments, like listening to the Melbourne Cup on a crackly radio up on Louis Dowd Hill, and a lot of very good parties around the company boozers. They were it was very democratic. Being a doc, you see, you're an officer, but you're a special type of officer, and so the digs used to get quite informal about that. they're not a great lot of barrel of laughs to be, you know, from what we've been through today. It sort of sounds very gloomy, but we had formal mess dinners, and with those same sort of menus, with army food, you know, sort of labelled to sound pretty good. You know, just sitting out there in our disgusting greens and sand floor. There's one occasion at the changeover from the symbol for the 5th Battalion, my battalion, was a pig. This was, as you were, a tiger. The symbol for the incoming battalion was a pig. So at the changeover, we presented them with a pig painted with tiger stripes, which went down very well. And they let that loose in the officers' mess, and that caused a lot of fun. But no, I haven't got a vast store of wonderful anecdotes. I'd have to dredge through my letters to find any good. I mean, there are lots of light-hearted moments, so I can't sort of put my finger on any good stuff.
No, that's all right. If I guess a young aspiring soldier sort of came to you and sort of was seeking a bit of advice because they wanted to join the service and go off to a war zone, I mean, given what you'd kind of been through and seen, what advice would you give them?
Well, see, any career has got its heap of pluses and minuses, isn't it? You could end up as a clerk in the GIO, sort of boring yourself to death. You see, so it does the military life. If provided you don't get too killed or mutilated, it is. I mean, it's a wonderful chapter for a young person's life, you know, and it can be a great career as well, you know, but it can kill some people and ruin some others, and is, you say, in the context of the big life picture, it is a reasonable option. I wouldn't stand in the way of it for sure. It can bring out the best in people. So when you see what miserable lives some people who never take any risks live, you say, well, that's not bad. I'm sure some of these guys in Iraq right now, they're probably they're learning a lot about themselves, and it's for a limited time. Yes, there's a risk, but most people got home.
Yeah, well, so far so good with the Australians.
Yeah, indeed, they've had an extraordinary run of luck. Yeah.